The photograph of the 1974 icebreaker Mackinac stuck in the frozen guts of Lake Superior sat inside Sarah Sullivan's locker on the USS Vigilance a reminder that ice didn't care about rank, horsepower, or the desperate prayers of men who thought they could bargain with the cold. By the time the Vigilance reached the 82nd parallel, Sarah would be the only person on the boat who understood that the ice wasn't screaming because it was breaking. It was screaming because it was being hunted. The air inside the Vigilance always smelled the same. A pressurized cocktail of amine, diesel fuel, ozone from the electronics, and the faint, metallic tang of recycled oxygen that never quite let you forget you were living inside a $2 billion steel lung. Sarah, the boat's executive officer, adjusted the collar of her NWU-type Roman III fleece and felt the familiar, dull thrum of the S9G nuclear reactor vibrating through the soles of her boots. It was a rhythm she felt in her marrow, a 60 hertz heartbeat that she'd spent the last 15 years of her life learning to translate. Most sailors heard the boat as a collection of noises: pumps, fans, valves, the occasional clatter of a dropped wrench in the galley. Sarah heard it as a symphony of tolerances. She knew when a bearing in the secondary coolant pump was 4 microns out of alignment just by the way it changed the vibration in the handrail outside the wardroom. She was from Superior, Wisconsin, a town where the lake stayed frozen well into May, and the wind off the water could strip the paint off a truck in a single afternoon. Her father had been a master mechanic on the ore boats, a man who taught her that every machine has a voice if you're patient enough to listen to it. He died when she was 19, leaving her with a toolbox, a scholarship to Annapolis, and a neurological quirk the doctors called hyperacusis, but she simply called noticing. Her brain didn't filter sound the way other people's did. It categorized it. It mapped it. On a submarine, where sound was the only currency that mattered, this was her secret weapon, though most of the men on the Vigilance just thought she was overly obsessed with the maintenance logs. Commander Robert Vance, the commanding officer, was a man who believed in the god of the digital display. He was 5'9", built like a fire hydrant, and had a career record that looked like a recruitment poster. He'd been given the Vigilance because he was reliable, predictable, and didn't believe in ghosts. As they sat in the cramped wardroom, the walls lined with faux wood paneling that did little to mask the industrial reality of the submarine, Vance tapped a rhythmic beat on the table with a heavy class ring. "The mission parameters are clear, Zoe," Vance said, his voice a gravelly baritone that had commanded 3 different crews to excellence. "We stay under the shelf, we maintain 3 knots, and we don't trip any sensors. The Russians have a listening post at the Lomonosov Ridge that's sensitive enough to hear a whale's heartbeat. We are a hole in the water, nothing more." Sarah looked at the chart displayed on the tactical monitor. They were currently navigating the Beaufort Sea, heading toward the marginal ice zone, the treacherous area where the open ocean meets the permanent polar ice cap. Above them was a ceiling of frozen salt water that could be anywhere from 10 to 60 feet thick. "I'm concerned about the thermal layers near the shelf, Captain," Sarah said, her voice level, devoid of any pleading. "The salinity is shifting faster than the morning's bathythermograph predicted. It's creating a refractive dead zone. If someone is sitting in that layer, we won't see them on active or passive sonar until we're practically touching their hull." Vance smiled, a tight, practiced expression that didn't reach his eyes. "That's why we have the N/BQQ-10 system, Sarah, the best sonar suite in the world. It filters out the environmental noise. You're looking for shadows in a room that's already pitch black. Stick to the navigation track. We have a schedule to keep." Sarah nodded once, a sharp, professional acknowledgement. She didn't argue. She knew that arguing with Vance was like trying to stop a tide with a bucket. She stood up, her movements fluid and economical in the tight space. As she walked toward the control room, she passed the chief of the boat, Master Chief Miller, a man whose face looked like a topographic map of the Appalachian Mountains. He watched her go, his eyes lingering on the way she tilted her head, listening to the hull. Miller was one of the few who had seen her work during the transit from Groton. He'd seen her find a hairline fracture in a steam line that the automated sensors had missed for weeks. He didn't say anything, but he stepped aside with a nod of genuine respect. In the control room, the lighting was rigged for red. a deep crimson hue that helped the watchstanders maintain their night vision for the periscope, even though they hadn't seen the sun in 10 days. The room was a hive of quiet, focused activity. The drivers sat at the yokes, adjusting the planes to keep the vigilance level in the shifting currents. The air was colder here, the chill of the Arctic Ocean leaching through the thick steel hull despite the insulation. Sarah walked over to the sonar shack, a small, darkened alcove off the main control room. Inside, 3 sonar technicians sat bathed in the blue glow of their waterfall displays. These screens showed a visual representation of every sound the submarine's ears, the spherical array in the bow and the towed array trailing behind them, could detect. Lines of light cascaded down the screens like digital rain. "Talk to me, Huck," Sarah whispered, leaning over the shoulder of Petty Officer Second Class Elias Huck Finn. Huck was 23, from a small town in Missouri, and possessed a preternatural ability to stay calm when the world was ending. He was the only person on the boat Sarah trusted with her observations. He didn't just look at the screens, he felt the data. "Ice scouring, ma'am," Huck said, pointing to a chaotic smudge of light on his display. "Big keels, sounds like 1,000 panes of glass breaking in slow motion. The ice is moving fast above us. The pressure is building up." Sarah put on a spare pair of headphones. She closed her eyes. The sound flooded her brain. To most, it was just white noise, the screech and groan of the ice cap as it shifted and cracked under its own immense weight. But Sarah began to peel back the layers. She ignored the high-frequency snaps of the ice. She filtered out the low-frequency rumble of the distant tectonic plates. She focused on the mid-range. There, it was a sound so faint it was almost a suggestion. A rhythmic metallic asterisk tick asterisk, not the steady beat of a propeller or the hum of a motor. It was a resonance, like a tuning fork being struck miles away. "Do you hear that, Huck?" she asked, her voice barely audible. Huck frowned, his eyes scanning the frequencies. He adjusted his filters, narrowing the band. "I've got the ice, ma'am. I've got a pod of belugas at 240. I don't see anything else. The system is scrubbing the rest as background clutter." "It's not clutter," Sarah said. She reached out and touched the screen, pointing to a tiny, almost invisible gap in the waterfall display where the noise of the ice seemed to bend. "The ice isn't making that sound. Something is reflecting off the ice. It's a shadow. If the BQQ-10 isn't tagging it as a contact, the captain isn't going to buy it," Huck said softly. He looked at her, his face pale in the blue light. "You know how he is about the algorithm, ma'am. If the computer says the room is empty, he'll walk right into a wall." Sarah took off the headphones. She could feel the tension in her jaw, the controlled rage of being right in a world that demanded data she couldn't yet prove. "Keep the raw audio, Huck. Don't let the system overwrite the buffer. I want every decibel of that clutter saved." She left the sonar shack and stepped back into the center of the control room. She felt the vigilance begin to bank slightly to port. They were entering the Narrow, a corridor of deep water between the continental shelf and a massive underwater mountain range. It was a graveyard of sunken ships and lost dreams, a place where the currents were unpredictable and the ice above was notoriously thick. "Zoe, I have a depth discrepancy," the navigator, Lieutenant J.G. Miller, called out. He was a nervous kid, fresh out of the power school, who treated his charts like holy relics. "The fathometer is reading 300 feet shallower than the chart says we should be. I think we're seeing a false bottom." "Or a thermal layer," Sarah said, moving to his station. She looked at the readings. The water temperature had dropped 4 degrees in the last 10 minutes. "We're entering a freshwater lens. The ice melting from the shelf is dumping cold, fresh water on top of the salt. It's bending the sonar pings. We aren't seeing the bottom, Miller. We're seeing a reflection of the ceiling." The captain ordered the current depth. "The officer of the deck oohed," Lieutenant Reed interrupted. Reed was a Vance man, ambitious, rigid, and suspicious of Sarah's intuitive style of leadership. "He wants to stay in the shadow of the ridge. If we drop deeper, we'll be silhouetted against the open water for the Lomonosov sensors." "If we stay at this depth, we risk a collision with a deep ice keel," Sarah countered. "The ice isn't flat, Reed. Some of these ridges reach down 100 feet or more. We're flying a blind jet through a mountain range in a fog bank." "The captain's orders stand," Reed said, his voice flat. He didn't even look at her. He kept his eyes on the depth gauge. Sarah felt the familiar constriction in her chest, the weight of a disaster she could see coming but was forbidden from stopping. She walked to the center of the room, her boots silent on the rubberized flooring. She placed her hand on the cold, sweat-beaded steel of a support stanchion. She closed her eyes and let the ship speak to her. The vigilance was straining. The pressure of the currents was pushing against the hull, creating a micro-vibration that Sarah could feel in the base of her skull. It was a high-frequency shiver. The ship was telling her that the water ahead was denser, harder. Suddenly, the tick she had heard in the sonar shack returned, but this time she didn't need headphones. She felt it through the hull. A rhythmic, percussive pulse, thump, 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 it was coming from above. "Captain to the bridge," Sarah said into the 1MC, the ship-wide intercom. Her voice was calm, but it held a quality of command that made the watchstanders look up. Vance appeared seconds later, his face flushed. He'd clearly been interrupted in the middle of a meal. "What is it, Zoe? I told you no interruptions unless we were taking on water." "Captain, I believe we are being shadowed," Sarah said. She didn't use the word think. She didn't use the word feel. Vance looked at the sonar repeaters. "Huck, do you have a contact?" Huck hesitated, his eyes darting to Sarah and then back to his screen. "Nothing firm, sir, just environmental noise. The XO thinks she hears something in the ice scouring." Vance let out a short, sharp laugh. "The ice scouring, Sarah, we are under 6 million tons of shifting ice. It makes noise. It's the loudest place on the planet. You're hearing the world turn." "It's not the ice, sir," Sarah said, stepping closer to him so the rest of the room couldn't hear. "The frequency is too stable. It's mechanical. And it's getting closer. I'm requesting we execute a clear rear maneuver. Let's turn the boat, put our main array on it, and see what's really there." "We are on a stealth mission, Sarah," Vance hissed. "A turn like that would put our screw signature right into the Russians' laps. We are not turning. We are not slowing down. We are going to continue on this course at this depth because those are my orders. Do I make myself clear? Captain, the safety of the ship. The safety of the ship is my responsibility," Vance cut her off. "Your responsibility is to execute my orders. Go to your cabin, Sarah. You've been on watch too long. You're starting to hear things that aren't there. That's an order." The silence in the control room was absolute. Even the hum of the fan seemed to dim. The crew, the men Sarah had trained with, bled with, and led, looked away. They looked at their consoles, their shoes, the ceiling. They saw the dismissal. They saw the XO, the woman who had always been a little too intense, a little too different, finally being put in her place by the man who held their lives in his hands. Sarah didn't flinch. She didn't blush. She didn't offer a single word of defense. She stood perfectly still, her face a mask of professional neutrality. "Aye, Captain," she said. She turned and walked out of the control room. She didn't go to her cabin. She went to the aft of the ship, past the engine room, to the very edge of the pressure hull where the metal was the thinnest and the cold was the most aggressive. She found a quiet corner near the emergency oxygen canisters and pressed her ear against the steel. She stayed there for an hour, a ghost in her own ship. The crew passed her, some offering sympathetic glances, others looking through her as if she were already gone. She didn't care. She was listening. The thump was louder now. It was no longer a tick. It was a grind. She realized then what it was. It wasn't a Russian submarine. It wasn't a drone. It was a dead man's drift. A massive piece of a prehistoric glacier, an iceberg that had been caught in a deep-sea current and flipped upside down. It was a mountain of ice, miles long, and it was submerged nearly 500 feet into the water. And because of the freshwater lens she had tried to warn Vance about, the sonar was seeing through it, treating it like a ghost, while the vigilance was steaming straight into its path. The ice wasn't hunting them. They were hunting the ice. Sarah stood up, her legs stiff from the cold. She knew that if she went back to the bridge and told Vance, he would call it another hallucination. He would see it as a desperate attempt to regain her standing. She needed proof. She made her way back to the sonar shack, moving through the shadows of the passageways. Huck was still there, but he was being watched by Reed, who was now acting as the eyes of the captain. Sarah waited until Reed was distracted by a communication from the radio room, then she slipped into the booth. "Huck," she whispered. The young man jumped, his eyes wide. "Ma'am, you're supposed to be in your cabin. If Reed sees you..." "Shift the gain on the high-frequency active pings," Sarah said, her voice a low, urgent hum. "Don't fire a ping, just listen to the return of the ambient noise. Look for the blue shift. The ice isn't just moving, Huck, it's accelerating toward us." "Ma'am, I can't." The captain locked the console. "He locked the user interface," Sarah said. She reached under the desk, her fingers finding a small, recessed maintenance port she'd discovered months ago during a routine inspection. She pulled a small, handheld diagnostic tool from her pocket, something she'd modified herself. He didn't lock the hardware. She plugged the tool in. The screen flickered, and suddenly the waterfall display changed. The clutter didn't disappear, it organized itself. Sarah saw it then. A massive, jagged wall of white light on the display. It was less than 2 miles away and closing. At their current speed, they would impact in less than 5 minutes. Jesus, Huck whispered. It's a wall, it's a literal wall of ice. Go to the bridge, Sarah said. Tell them. They won't listen to me, ma'am. They'll think I messed with the settings. They'll listen when the hull starts to scream, Sarah said. She pushed him toward the door. As Huck ran toward the control room, Sarah stayed in the booth. She watched the wall of light get closer. She felt the vigilance hit a pocket of turbulence, the entire 110-meter-long ship shuddering as it entered the pressure wave created by the massive iceberg. On the bridge, she could hear the chaos erupting. Sonar, what was that? Vance's voice boomed over the intercom. Captain, I have a massive acoustic return. Huck's voice was cracking with fear. Object is dead ahead, depth is. Oh God, it's the whole water column. It's an iceberg, sir. It's a submerged borg. All stop, full rise on the Fairwater Plains. Vance yelled, emergency deep, blow the main ballast. But Sarah knew it was too late. The vigilance was too heavy, its momentum too great. They were trying to turn a skyscraper in a bathtub. The sound started then. It wasn't a bang. It was a long, slow, agonizing shriek of metal on ice. The vigilance didn't hit the iceberg head-on, it grazed it. The side of the submarine, designed to withstand the crushing pressure of the deep ocean, was suddenly being ground against 1 billion tons of prehistoric ice. The ship tilted violently to starboard. Men were thrown from their seats. A pipe in the overhead snapped, spraying high-pressure hydraulic fluid into the air like a mist of blood. The lights flickered, died, and then the eerie red emergency glow kicked in. Damage report! Vance screamed over the roar of the screeching metal. Sarah stepped out of the sonar shack. She was the only one standing perfectly straight, her hand lightly gripping the edge of a console. She looked through the smoke and the chaos at Vance, who was clutching the captain's chair, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated terror. He looked at her, and for a second the mask slipped. He saw her. He saw the woman who had told him this would happen. Hull breach in the torpedo room. The intercom shrieked. We're taking on water. The outer door is jammed. The vigilance was pinned. They weren't sinking yet, but they were wedged between the iceberg and the seafloor, the massive weight of the ice pressing down on them, slowly crushing the pressure hull like a soda can. The crew was paralyzed. They had been trained for war, for torpedoes, for engine failures. They hadn't been trained for this, to be buried alive under the world's most desolate ceiling. Sarah walked into the center of the control room. The sound of the ice was deafening now, a rhythmic crunch 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 as the iceberg rolled in the current, grinding the vigilance deeper into the silt. Captain, Sarah said, her voice cutting through the noise like a blade. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It was the only thing in the room that sounded like a solution. Vance looked at her, his breathing ragged. He was a good man, but he was a man of the system, and the system had just failed him. We're pinned, Sarah. The ballast tanks are damaged. We can't blow our way out. If we use the engine, we'll just rip the side of the boat open. Sarah looked at the tactical display, which was flickering with error messages. She didn't need the display. She could hear the iceberg. She could hear the way the ice was structured, the hollows, the stress lines, the places where it was brittle and the places where it was solid. We aren't going to use the engine, Sarah said. She looked at the crew, her eyes meeting Huck's, then Miller's. She saw the fear in them, but she also saw something else. They were looking for a leader. We're going to use the sonar, she said. The room went silent, except for the terrifying groan of the hull. What? Vance asked, his voice a whisper. The iceberg is under immense internal stress from the temperature change, Sarah said, her words coming fast and precise. It's resonant. If we hit it with a high-decibel active sonar pulse at exactly the right frequency, we can shatter the shelf holding us down. We can create a localized fracture. The ice will break, the pressure will release, and we'll slide out. That's impossible, Reed snapped, his voice trembling. The sonar isn't a weapon, it's a sensor. You'll just blow out our own transducers. It's physics, Reed, Sarah said, turning to him. Everything has a resonant frequency, even 1 billion tons of ice. I just need to find it. She looked at Vance. The decision was his. He could stay the course and wait for the hull to collapse, or he could hand the ship over to the woman he had just humiliated, the woman who heard things no one else could. The hull gave another terrifying crack. Dust and paint chips fell from the ceiling like snow. Do it, Vance whispered. Give her whatever she needs. Sarah didn't waste a second. She didn't look at Vance with triumph. She didn't offer a told you so. She moved to the sonar console, her fingers dancing over the keys with a speed that spoke of 1,000 hours of hidden practice. "Huck, I need the wideband emitters on manual override," she said. "I need you to bypass the safety governors. We're going to redline the transducers." "Ma'am, if we do that, we'll be deaf for the rest of the mission," Huck said, already working the controls. "If we don't do it, there won't be a rest of the mission," Sarah said. She put the headphones on, she closed her eyes, she let the world of the vigilance fade away. She entered the ice. She listened to the way the Borg groaned, she felt the pitch of the stress. It was a low, mournful E-flat. "Frequency 41.2 Hertz, Sarah said. "Increase power to 120%. 120. Huck gasped. "The cooling systems won't hold." "They only need to hold for 6 seconds, Sarah said. She gripped the edges of the console. She could feel the crew watching her. She could feel the weight of the ice above them, the cold, dark pressure of the Arctic Ocean, and the fragile lives of the 130 men who were now betting everything on a woman they had spent the last 3 months dismissing. In the back of her mind, she thought of her father and the Mackinac asterisk. He told her once that the ice always wins in the end, unless you know how to make it dance. "Charging," Huck said, his voice shaking. "Capacitors at 80%, 90, 100. Sarah felt the vibration of the sonar array charging up, a high-pitched whine that set her teeth on edge. She waited. She listened to the iceberg. She waited for the exact moment the current shifted, for the second the Borg leaned just an inch to the left. There. "Fire," Sarah said. The vigilance shuddered with a force Sarah had never felt before. It wasn't an external hit. It was an internal scream. The sonar pulse was so powerful it turned the water around the bow into a cloud of cavitation bubbles. The sound was a physical blow, a massive, invisible hammer hitting the wall of ice. For 3 seconds, nothing happened. Then the world broke. A sound like 1,000 freight trains colliding echoed through the hull. The iceberg didn't just crack, it detonated. A massive fissure ripped through the ice shelf, sending shockwaves through the water that tossed the submarine like a toy. "We're moving," Miller yelled. "Depth is increasing, we're sliding out." The vigilance groaned as it broke free from the silt, the damaged ballast tanks groaning as the air inside them expanded. The ship tilted, then leveled out as it plummeted into the dark, cold safety of the deep water. "Full rise on the planes. Level her out at 800 feet. Vance shouted, his voice finally finding its strength again. As the ship stabilized, the silence returned. But it was a different kind of silence. The screaming of the ice was gone, replaced by the distant, muffled sound of the iceberg's remnants grinding against each other. Sarah sat back in the sonar chair. Her hands were shaking, a tiny, uncontrollable tremor that she quickly hid by gripping her knees. Her ears were ringing, and the copper taste of adrenaline was sharp in her mouth. Vance walked into the sonar shack. He looked at the shattered screens, the smoking diagnostic tool, and then at Sarah. The crew in the control room was quiet, their eyes fixed on the two of them. "Zoe," Vance said. He stopped, his voice failing him for a moment. He looked at the hull, then back at her. "The hull. The damage report says we have a 30-foot dent in the outer casing. If we'd stayed there another 10 minutes. "We didn't stay, Captain," Sarah said, her voice steady. "No," Vance said. "We didn't." He looked around at the sonar technicians, at the Vance men who were now looking at Sarah with a mixture of awe and shame. "I want a full damage assessment. And I want the XO's logs from the last 24 hours appended to the official mission record, every word of them." He turned to leave, then paused. "Sarah, you were right about all of it." He walked away, leaving her in the blue-lit shadows of the sonar shack. Huck looked at her, a wide, shaky grin on his face. "Ma'am, I've never seen anything like that." Sarah didn't smile. She didn't feel like a hero. She felt like a woman who had just barely survived a world that was designed to break her. She reached into her pocket and felt the letter from her father, the paper crinkling under her thumb. She looked at the display. The sonar was dead. They were blind in the dark. "We aren't home yet, Huck," she said softly. She stood up and walked toward the bridge. As she passed the crew, they didn't look away this time. They stood a little straighter. They cleared a path. Master Chief Miller stepped out and gave her a slow, deliberate salute. Sarah acknowledged him with a nod and took her place at the center of the room. She looked at the red-lit consoles and the dark water beyond the hull. She could still hear the ice even without the sonar. It was a distant, receding roar. But beneath that she heard something else. A new sound. A low, rhythmic pulsing that wasn't the iceberg, wasn't the reactor, and wasn't the current. It was coming from the deep water, from the direction of the Russian shelf. It was a sound she had never heard before, a sound that didn't belong in nature. And this time she knew exactly what it was. The Vigilance asterisk had survived the ice, but in shattering the Borg they had sent a signal that could be heard all the way to Moscow. They weren't a hole in the water anymore, they were a beacon. "Captain," Sarah said, her voice echoing in the quiet room, "we need to go deep, now." Vance looked at her, and this time he didn't check the screens. He didn't look at the algorithm, he just looked at her. "How deep, Zoe?" "As deep as the steel will take us," Sarah said. She felt the Vigilance asterisk tilt its nose down, diving into the crushing pressure of the abyss. The ship began to groan again, but this time it was the sound of the boat doing exactly what it was built for. Sarah closed her eyes and listened. The new sound was getting louder. It was a hunt. And for the first time in her life, Sarah Sullivan wasn't afraid of the noise. She was the one who knew how to translate it. The water outside was freezing, the pressure was mounting, and the enemy was closing in. But as the Vigilance asterisk slipped into the shadows of the deep, Sarah felt a cold, hard clarity settle over her. She would get them home, even if she had to break the world again to do it. The lights in the control room flickered once, then settled into a steady, blood-red glow. Sarah Sullivan stood at the heart of the ship, her head tilted, her mind mapping the darkness, waiting for the first note of the battle to begin. The mutiny of silence was over. The war for the deep had just started. As the depth gauge passed 1,000 feet, a new alarm began to chime in the distance, not a mechanical failure, but a tactical warning. The radio room had picked up a burst transmission from the surface. Sarah looked at the paper in her hand, then tucked it back into her pocket. The letter from her father would have to wait. The ice had been the easy part. What was coming next was the reason she had really joined the Navy. She looked at the OOD. "Status on the towed array?" "Still offline, ma'am. The fracture must have severed the cable." "Then we do it the old-fashioned way," Sarah said. She turned to the crew, her voice like iron. "Everyone listen to me. I want this boat silent. No talking, no tool drops, no unnecessary movement. We are going to become a shadow, and if you hear anything at all, you tell me immediately, because the thing out there, it's not looking for the Vigilance asterisk, it's looking for me." The crew stared at her, the weight of her words sinking in. They didn't ask questions, they didn't doubt her. They just did as they were told, moving like ghosts through the red-lit ship. Sarah walked back to the sonar shack and sat down in the dark. She didn't need the screens. She didn't need the headphones, she just needed to listen. And in the cold, pressurized silence of the Arctic deep, Sarah Sullivan heard the first, faint whisper of the torpedo door opening 5 miles away. She didn't move. She didn't scream. She just waited for the sound to tell her what to do next. The sound of a torpedo tube flooding is not a bang. It is a sharp, metallic sigh, the sound of an intake valve gasping for the weight of the ocean. Sarah Sullivan felt it in her molars before the acoustic processors even registered the change in ambient pressure. To the rest of the crew in the red-lit gloom of the Vigilance asterisk, the world was still recovering from the violent shudder of the iceberg's destruction. But to Sarah, the silence was now a predatory thing. The Russian sub, a Bore class, or perhaps something newer and quieter, had been lurking in the acoustic shadow of the Lomonosov Ridge, waiting for the Americans to make a mistake. The shattering of the iceberg wasn't just a rescue, it was a dinner bell. "Snapshot 280, Sarah said, her voice dropping into a register of absolute, terrifying calm. She didn't look at the empty sonar screens. She didn't wait for Huck to confirm. "Captain, we have a transient, tube opening, water entry. They're firing." Commander Vance, still bracing himself against the chart table, looked at her with a face that had aged 10 years in the last hour. He didn't hesitate this time. The man who had dismissed her as an alarmist 30 minutes ago now looked at her as if she were the only thing between him and a cold grave. "Helm, hard rise, all ahead flank, port 30. The Vigilance asterisk groaned, the massive S9G reactor screaming as the turbine valves opened wide, dumping raw power into the propulsion system. The ship, already wounded, began to vibrate with a violent, rhythmic thrum that Sarah hated. It was too loud, too obvious, a neon sign in a dark alleyway, but they needed the speed. "I don't have it on the array," Huck yelled, his hands flying across the dead console, trying to force the backup sensors to prioritize the western arc. "Screens are still washed out from the ice cavitation." "It doesn't matter what the screens say, Huck," Sarah said, stepping behind him. She put her hand on his shoulder, her fingers pressing into the fabric of his coveralls. She could feel his heart racing through his back. "Listen to the hull, forget the filters." Focus on the 4 kilohertz band. It's a Type 65 wakehomer. It's not looking for our sound, it's looking for our turbulence. The torpedo hit the water with a dull asterisk thump asterisk that echoed through the sea. It was 5 miles away, a distance that felt like a lifetime in a car, but was a mere heartbeat in the physics of underwater warfare. Sarah closed her eyes, mapping the trajectory in her mind. The weapon was fast, cutting through the water at 50 knots, sniffing the trail of bubbles the asterisk vigilance asterisk left in its desperate wake. Countermeasures? Vance shouted. No, Sarah said, her voice cutting through the panic. If we drop decoys now, the wakehomer will just ignore them. We're too shallow. The surface reflection is giving it a clear path. We have to go down. We're already at 900 feet, Zoe, the navigator Miller whispered, his eyes wide. The iceberg impact. We don't know the integrity of the vertical stabilizers. If we dive too fast, we might not pull out. Sarah looked at Vance. The institutional failure of the United States Navy was currently manifesting as a series of red blinking lights on the damage control board. The system was designed for perfect hulls and predictable enemies. It was not designed for a crippled boat being hunted by a ghost in a freshwater lens. The procedure said to stay shallow, maintain communication, and wait for a support fleet that was 3,000 miles away. The procedure is going to get us killed, Robert, Sarah said, using the captain's first name for the first time in 3 years. Vance looked at the depth gauge. He looked at the sonar repeaters. He looked at the sweat dripping from the tip of Huck's nose. He was a man of the book, but the book was currently on fire. Take us down, 1,100 feet, full dive on the Fairwater Plains. The asterisk vigilance asterisk tilted its nose into the abyss. The sound of the water changed immediately, the pressure beginning to squeeze the hull, 1,000 tiny groans of high-tensile steel adjusting to the weight of the world. At 1,100 feet, they were past the official safety margin for a damaged vessel. The crushed depth was a theoretical number on a piece of paper in an office in Arlington, but down here, it was a physical limit Sarah could hear approaching. The hull was singing a high-pitched, metallic note, a C-sharp that told her the welds on the outer casing were under maximum stress. Torpedo is closing, Huck whispered. 3 miles, it's picked up our speed, it's accelerating. Quiet the boat, Sarah commanded. Ahead 1/3, we can't outrun it, we have to outthink it. As the asterisk vigilance asterisk slowed, the violent vibration subsided, replaced by the terrifyingly intimate sounds of a submarine in distress. Water was dripping somewhere in the aft, a steady, rhythmic asterisk plink 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 asterisk that felt like a ticking clock. The air was getting thicker, the smell of burnt electrical insulation from the sonar mishap lingering in the back of Sarah's throat. She walked over to the OOD station and looked at the bathythermograph. The water temperature was dropping. They were entering a trench, a narrow canyon on the seafloor that hadn't been fully mapped since the 70s. There, Sarah said, pointing to a dark, jagged line on the paper chart. The devil's finger, it's a basalt spire. If we can put that spire between us and the torpedo, the wakehomer will lose the trail in the rock's acoustic shadow. We're navigating a canyon we can't see with a hull that's leaking, Reed muttered, though there was no bite in his voice anymore, only a hollow, exhausted fear. We can see it, Sarah said. She turned to Master Chief Miller, who had just entered the bridge from the engine room, his hands covered in black grease. Chief, I need the emergency pinger, not the long-range sonar. The docking pinger, I want to use it like a flashlight. Ma'am, that pinger only has a range of 500 yards, Miller said, wiping his hands on a rag. It's for high-resolution proximity work. That's all the room we're going to have, Sarah replied. The relationship between an XO and the chief of the boat is the marrow of a submarine. The officers provide the direction, but the chiefs provide the reality. Miller looked at Sarah, really looked at her, and saw the noticing in her eyes. He had seen her find the steam leak. He had seen her break the ice. He didn't see a woman who was guessing. He saw a predator who had finally found her environment. You heard the XO, Miller barked at the technicians. Reroute the docking array to the forward station. If she wants a flashlight, give her a goddamn searchlight. The next 10 minutes were a masterclass in dark competence. Sarah took the headset from Huck. She didn't sit, she stood, leaning against the console, her eyes closed. She wasn't looking at the world, she was listening to its shape. Asterisk ping. Asterisk the sound went out, a tiny, sharp needle of noise. It hit the canyon wall and came back. In Sarah's mind, a map began to form. A jagged wall to the left, a steep drop to the right. A massive, looming shadow dead ahead. Asterisk ping. Asterisk port 5, she whispered. There's a shelf, we're going to hug it. The asterisk vigilance asterisk crept forward at 5 knots. Above them, the Russian torpedo was searching, its active sonar chirping like a frantic bat. The sound of the torpedo's pings was getting louder, a rhythmic asterisk tink 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 asterisk that sounded like someone tapping a spoon against the outside of the hull. "It's at the entrance of the canyon," Huck said, his voice a ghost. "It's lost our wake, it's going active, it's searching for a hard return." "Steady," Sarah said. She felt the ship's nose past the basalt spire. "Hold this course, don't breathe." The entire control room held its breath. The only sound was the drip of the hydraulic leak and the distant, muffled asterisk chirp asterisk of the torpedo. The weapon passed directly over them, less than 200 feet above their sail. The sound was a roar, a mechanical predator screaming in frustration as its sensors were confused by the massive rock formations and the turbulent water Sarah had led them into. Then a new sound. A heavy, low-frequency asterisk thud asterisk from above, then silence. "It hit the canyon wall," Huck whispered, a grin breaking across his face. "The torpedo is gone. It's dead." A small cheer started to break out, but Sarah raised a hand, her face grim. "Don't. The torpedo is gone, but the sub that fired it knows exactly where we are now. They heard that explosion, and they heard our pinger." Vance nodded, the reality of their situation settling back in. "They're going to come for us. They can't let us leave with what we've seen." "What have we seen, Captain?" Sarah asked, her voice sharp. This wasn't a standard patrol. That sub was sitting in wait. They weren't protecting the ridge. They were protecting something asterisk on asterisk the ridge. The institutional failure began to grind again. At that moment, the radio room buzzed. A VLF, very low frequency, signal was coming through. It was a flash message from Comsublant, the high command for the Atlantic Fleet. Vance stepped into the small radio shack to decode it. When he came out, he was holding a slip of paper. His face was pale. "Orders, Captain?" Sarah asked. "We are ordered to surface immediately," Vance said, his voice flat. "The State Department has received a formal protest from the Kremlin. They're claiming we intentionally rammed a Russian research station. Command is ordering us to a rendezvous point 40 miles east of here. We're to be boarded by a neutral inspection team." "Surface." Sarah's voice was a whip. "In the middle of a tactical engagement? With a compromised hull? Captain, if we surface, we're a sitting duck. And that neutral team will be Russian special forces in a different coat." "It's a direct order from the Admiral, Sarah," Vance said, and there it was, the weight of the chain of command, the crushing gravity of a system that valued diplomacy and de-escalation over the lives of the people in the dirt. Or, in this case, the deep. "They think they can talk their way out of this. They think if we show good faith, the Russians will back off. The Russians just tried to put a wake homer through our engine room," Sarah said, stepping into Vance's personal space. She didn't care about the protocol anymore. She cared about the 130 men on the other side of the bulkheads. "They aren't looking for good faith. They're looking for the asterisk vigilance asterisk to disappear. If we surface, we are giving them exactly what they want." "I have my orders, Zoe," Vance said, though his eyes were searching hers, looking for an out. He was a man who had spent 30 years following the rules. Breaking them now felt like jumping out of a plane without a parachute. "The orders are based on bad data," Sarah said. She turned to the chart. "Look at the timing. That VLF message was sent before the torpedo was fired. Command doesn't know we're under fire. They don't know about the asterisk Sviatoger asterisk." "The what?" Vance asked. "The asterisk Sviatoger asterisk," Sarah repeated. She pointed to a small handwritten notation she'd made on her own clipboard. "That sound I heard earlier, the rhythmic pulse, it's not a bore, it's the asterisk Sviatoger asterisk project, a deep-sea nuclear-powered interceptor designed for cable cutting and seabed warfare. It's experimental. It's not on the official charts, but the ASINT, Acoustic Intelligence, briefings from 3 years ago mentioned a prototype that used a specific magnetic drive propulsion. That's the asterisk thump asterisk I heard. It's silent to the BQQ-10 because the computer is programmed to look for propellers, but it's not silent to me." She looked at the crew. She saw Miller watching her. She saw Huck. She saw the Vance men. They were all waiting. "If that ship is out there," Sarah continued, her voice gaining strength, "it means the Russians have a permanent installation on the Lomonosov Ridge. A listening post that can hear every sub in the Atlantic. That iceberg wasn't just in our way, it was their shield. We broke it. We exposed them, and they are not going to let us take that information back to Groton." The room was silent. The institutional failure was no longer a vague concept. It was a physical presence in the room. The choice was between a suicidal order from a man in a warm office in Virginia or a mutinous survival plan proposed by an XO who could hear the ocean's secrets. Vance looked at the decode slip in his hand. He looked at the red emergency lights. Slowly, deliberately, he crumpled the paper into a ball. "The radio is damaged," Vance said, his voice steady. "The impact with the iceberg must have knocked out our VLF receiver. We never received the order to surface." A ripple of relief, followed by a surge of renewed tension, went through the bridge. They had just crossed the line. They were officially off reservation. "What's the plan, Sarah?" Vance asked. "We don't go to the rendezvous," she said. "We go deeper, into the trench. If we can get under the thermal layer at 1,400 feet, the *Svayatagar* won't be able to find us with its magnetic sensors. There's a geological fault line 10 miles south. It's noisy, volcanic vents shifting plates. If we get there, we can disappear." 1,400 feet, Miller whispered. "The *Vigilance* is rated for 16, but with that dent in the hull." "Ma'am, we're going to be flirting with the limits of the steel." "Then let's make sure the steel knows we're on its side," Sarah said. She turned back to the sonar station. "Huck, I need you to do something for me. I need you to take the raw audio feed from the hull sensors and pipe it directly into my headset. No filters, no digital scrubbing. I want the noise, all of it." "It'll be deafening, ma'am," Huck warned. "The pressure, the reactor. It'll be like standing in the middle of a construction site." "Just do it," Sarah said. She sat down and pulled the headphones over her ears. The world exploded. The sound of the *Vigilance* was a cacophony. The roar of the coolant pumps, the hiss of the ventilation, the tiny, incessant creaking of the bulkheads. It was a storm of industrial noise. But Sarah didn't flinch. She began to breathe in time with the reactor's hum. She let her mind expand, pushing past the internal noise, reaching out into the cold, black water outside. She heard the canyon walls. She heard the distant, dying echoes of the torpedo. And then she heard it. Thump, 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 it was closer now. The *Svayatagar* was moving through the upper layers of the canyon, searching for them like a hawk looking for a mouse in the tall grass. It was moving slow, confident. It knew they were trapped in the trench. "They're above us," Sarah said, her eyes fixed on nothing. "They're trying to herd us toward the shallow end of the canyon." "We need more speed," Vance said. "No," Sarah countered. "We need to go down, now." The *Vigilance* began its descent. 1,200 feet. The sound of the hull changed from a groan to a series of sharp, percussive *pops*. This was the oil canning effect, the steel plates of the submarine literally deforming under the immense pressure, snapping into new shapes as the ocean squeezed the life out of the boat. Every *pop* felt like a gunshot in the quiet room. The crew flinched with everyone. But Sarah sat motionless, her head tilted, her mind locked onto the *thump* of the enemy. 1,300 feet, Miller announced. The sweat was pouring off his face now. "Hull integrity is holding, but the seals on the torpedo tubes are starting to weep. We're taking on a few gallons a minute in the bow." "Keep the pumps on low," Sarah said. "We can't afford the acoustic signature of a high-pressure discharge." At 1,350 feet, the temperature inside the boat began to drop. The heaters couldn't keep up with the freezing cold of the deep Arctic water leaching through the steel. Sarah could see her own breath in the red light, a pale, ghostly mist that vanished with every exhale. She felt a hand on her arm. It was Huck. He was holding out a plastic cup of lukewarm, terrible Navy coffee. "You need to drink something, ma'am," he whispered. "You've been in that headset for 3 hours." Sarah took the cup, her fingers brushing his. His hand was shaking. She looked at him, and for a fleeting second the XO mask slipped. She saw the kid from Missouri who just wanted to go home and see his girlfriend. She saw the cost of her noticing. It wasn't just her life on the line, it was his. It was all of theirs. "We're going to make it, Huck," she said, her voice soft but filled with a conviction that was almost a physical weight. "I know," Huck said, "because you can hear them. They can't hear us, but you can hear them." That was the relationship, not words of praise, not medals, just the simple, terrifying trust of a man who knew his life was in the hands of someone who saw a world he couldn't even imagine. Sarah took a sip of the coffee. It tasted like battery acid and old beans, but it was warm. It grounded her. She put the headphones back on. *thump, thump, thump. The *Svayatagar* had stopped. "Captain," Sarah said, her voice tight. "They've stopped. They're hovering right over the thermal layer." "What are they doing?" Vance asked. "They are listening," Sarah said. "They know we're down here. They're waiting for us to make a noise, or for the pressure to do the job for them." The *Vigilance* was now at 1,400 feet. They were sitting on the edge of the abyss, a $2 billion machine held together by hope and high-tensile welds. The silence was absolute. Nobody moved, nobody spoke. The only sound was the slow, steady asterisk drip, drip, drip asterisk from the forward torpedo room. An hour passed. Then two. The air was getting foul. The CO2 scrubbers were struggling in the cold, and a dull ache began to form behind Sarah's eyes. She stayed in the headset, her mind a fraying wire of concentration. She was listening for the asterisk Esvayatagar asterisk, but she was also listening to the asterisk Vigilance asterisk. The ship was tired. Sarah could hear it. The reactor was straining to keep the systems alive at this depth. The main bearing in the propeller shaft was beginning to grind, a sound so faint only she could hear it, a dry, metallic friction that told her the lubrication system was failing under the pressure. If that bearing seized, they were dead. They would be a dead weight in the dark. "Chief," Sarah whispered into her comms. "The main shaft bearing, I need you to get a team down there. Use the manual lube bypass. Don't use the pumps, do it by hand." "By hand, ma'am?" Miller's voice crackled in her ear. "The housing is at 200 degrees. If we open that bypass, someone's going to get burned." "Tell them it's that or the ocean," Sarah said. She heard the movement in the aft, the quiet, desperate scramble of men trying to save their ship without making a sound. She felt the vibration of the bearing change, the dry grind softening into a smooth, wet hum as the manual lube hit the steel. She let out a breath she hadn't known she was holding. But then she heard it. A new sound, not from the asterisk Esvayatagar asterisk, not from the asterisk Vigilance asterisk. It was a low, mournful groan from the canyon floor. "Captain," Sarah said, her voice trembling for the first time. "The seafloor, it's moving." Vance moved to the navigation station. "We're over the Gackle Ridge. It's an active volcanic zone. The plates are shifting." "It's not just a shift," Sarah said. She felt a vibration through the soles of her boots that wasn't the reactor. It was a deep tectonic shudder. The pressure, the iceberg breaking. It must have triggered a localized slump, a mudslide. On a submarine, a mudslide is a nightmare. It creates a density current, a wall of silt and rock that moves through the water like an underwater avalanche. It's heavy, it's fast, and it can crush a submarine against a canyon wall before the pilot even knows it's there. "How long?" Vance asked. "Minutes," Sarah said. She could hear the roar now, a chaotic, crashing sound like a mountain falling into the sea. "We have to move, we have to go up. If we go up, the asterisk Esvayatagar asterisk will see us," Reed said. "If we stay here, we'll be buried," Sarah countered. Vance didn't hesitate. "All ahead flank, full rise on the planes, blow the safety tanks." The asterisk Vigilance asterisk roared to life. The silence was over. The boat surged upward, its engine screaming as it fought the weight of the water. Behind them, the canyon floor disintegrated. A massive wall of silt and debris hundreds of feet high began to chase them up the trench. "We're being tracked," Huck yelled. "The asterisk Esvayatagar asterisk has a lock. They're diving." Sarah didn't look back. She focused on the sound of the avalanche. It was gaining on them. The asterisk Vigilance asterisk, damaged and heavy, couldn't climb fast enough. "They're firing again," Huck screamed. Two transients, more wakehomers. The situation had gone from a tactical chess match to a street brawl. The asterisk Vigilance asterisk was caught between a mountain of mud and two high-speed torpedoes, with a Russian hunter-killer diving down to finish the job. Sarah felt the adrenaline spike, her noticing shifting into a higher gear. The world slowed down. The noise of the avalanche, the scream of the torpedoes, the roar of their own engine, it all separated into distinct layers of data. "Captain, give me the helm," Sarah said. Vance didn't even blink. "XO has the con." Sarah stood at the center of the bridge. She didn't look at the yokes. She didn't look at the displays. She looked into the red-lit dark. "Helm, port 20, maintain flank speed. We're going back into the mud." "Into the mud?" the driver asked, his voice cracking. "The density current," Sarah said. "The silt is thicker than the water. It'll confuse the torpedo sensors. It's like a smoke screen. We're going to dive into the edge of the slide, use the momentum to carry us over the ridge, and then we're going to drop like a stone into the deep water on the other side." "You'll rip the sail off the boat," Reed said. "Then we'll be a faster boat," Sarah replied. The asterisk Vigilance asterisk banked hard, the ship tilting 60 degrees to port. The men clung to their stations as the submarine slammed into the edge of the underwater avalanche. The sound was deafening, the roar of 1,000,000 tons of silt grinding against the hull. It felt like being inside a giant rock tumbler. "I've lost the torpedoes," Huck yelled over the noise. "They're hitting the debris. They're detonating early." Two massive explosions rocked the water, but the Vigilance was already inside the smoke. The ship was being buffeted by the current, the hull screaming as the silt stripped the paint and the external sensors from the steel. "Now!" Sarah shouted. "Hard rise, clear the ridge." The Vigilance popped out of the mud like a cork, the ship soaring over the jagged edge of the canyon. For a split second they were in clear water, the Svayatagar visible on the sonar for the first time. A dark, sleek shape hovering just a mile away, its weapons bays open. "Fire tube 1 and 2, Vance ordered. Snap shot. The Vigilance finally bit back. Two Mk-48 ADCAP torpedoes launched from the bow, their engines roaring as they sped toward the Russian interceptor. The Svayatagar didn't try to run. It was too close. It deployed a massive acoustic jammer, a wall of white noise that blinded the Vigilance's torpedoes. The ADCAPs began to circle, lost in the electronic fog. "They're good," Huck whispered. "Not good enough," Sarah said. She reached out and took the manual guidance joystick for the torpedoes. On the screen, the two green dots of their weapons were spinning aimlessly. "I'm taking over the wire," Sarah said. She closed her eyes. She didn't use the radar return. She used the sound of the Svayatagar's magnetic drive. She could hear it, that rhythmic thump even through the jammer. It was like a heartbeat in a thunderstorm. She moved the joystick, her movements tiny, precise. She wasn't steering the torpedoes, she was feeling them through the water. She guided them around the edge of the jammer, using the Svayatagar's own acoustic shadow against it. "I have a solid lock," Sarah whispered. The green dots on the screen suddenly straightened out. They dived. The explosion was different this time. It wasn't a dull thump. It was a sharp, catastrophic crack. The Svayatagar a prototype made of experimental alloys, didn't just sink, it disintegrated. The nuclear reactor went prompt critical for a microsecond before the ocean extinguished it, creating a flash of light that even the sonar could see. The shockwave hit the Vigilance a few seconds later, a hammer blow that threw Sarah against the console. She felt a sharp pain in her shoulder, the heat of a broken bone, but she didn't let go of the headset. The silence that followed was heavy. The Svayatagar was gone. The avalanche had settled. The Vigilance was drifting in the dark, 500 miles from anywhere safe. Sarah pulled the headset off. Her ears were bleeding, a thin trickle of red running down her neck. She looked at the bridge. The crew was staring at her. They weren't cheering, they were in awe. They were looking at the woman who had just navigated a mudslide, survived a torpedo attack, and manually guided a kill in the middle of a jammer's fog. Vance walked over to her. He didn't say anything at first. He just looked at her bleeding ears and her mangled shoulder. He took a clean handkerchief from his pocket and pressed it to her ear. "You saved us, Sarah," he said, his voice thick with an emotion he couldn't quite name. "I saved the boat, Robert," she said, her voice strained. "The mission isn't over." "We're heading home," Vance said. "That's the mission now." "No," Sarah said. She stood up, ignoring the pain. "The Russians are going to say we attacked them. They're going to use this to lock down the Arctic. If we go home now, they win the narrative. We need the proof." "Proof of what?" Reed asked. "The listening post," Sarah said. She pointed to the navigation screen. "It's not on the ridge. It's inside the ridge. I heard the power cables during the slide. A 600 hertz hum. It's a massive geothermal tapping station. They're using the ridge's own heat to power a surveillance grid that covers the entire North Pole." She looked at Vance. "We need to go back. We need to get the acoustic signature of that station. We need to prove it's a military installation, not a research center." "Sarah, look at the boat," Vance said, gesturing to the flickering lights and the weeping bulkheads. "We're barely holding on. If we go back there and another sub shows up." "If we don't go back, the next war is already lost," Sarah said. The institutional failure was still there, lurking in the shadows. The system would tell them to run. The system would tell them to protect the asset. But Sarah Sullivan wasn't a part of the system anymore. She was the one who heard the truth. Suddenly, the radio room buzzed again. This time, it wasn't a VLF signal. It was a high-frequency burst, a local transmission. "Captain, I'm picking up a distress signal," the radio operator said, his voice trembling. It's on a Navy frequency. It's an American beacon." Vance frowned. "There are no other American boats in this sector. We're alone." "It's not a boat, sir," the operator said. "It's a black box signal. It's coming from the bottom of the trench, directly under the Russian station." Sarah felt a cold shiver go down her spine, a black box signal. That only meant one thing: an American asset had already been there, and they hadn't made it out. "It's a trap," Reed whispered. "It has to be. Or it's the reason we were sent here in the first place," Sarah said. She looked at Vance. "Command didn't just send us on a routine patrol. They sent us to find whatever that signal is. They just didn't tell us because they didn't think we'd make it this far." The weight of the betrayal settled over the room. They had been a disposable mission, a probe sent into a hornet's nest to see how many hornets came out. Sarah walked to the chart table. She looked at the location of the signal. It was deep, 1,700 feet, in the heart of the volcanic fault line. "We're going down," Sarah said. It wasn't a suggestion. "Zoe," Vance started. "Robert," she said, her eyes boring into his. "Someone is down there, an American, maybe more than one, and they have the data we need. We are not leaving them behind." Vance looked at his crew. He saw the exhaustion in their eyes, but he also saw the same fire that was burning in Sarah. They were the Vigilance *. They were a hole in the water, and they weren't finished yet. "Dive," Vance said. 1,700 feet, steady as she goes." The Vigilance * tilted its nose down for the final time. The ship groaned, the steel screaming in protest as they passed the official crushed depth. The *pop pop pop * of the hull became a continuous roar, a sound like a giant's hands trying to crush a tin can. Sarah sat back in the sonar chair. She put the headphones on. She didn't listen for the *. She didn't listen for the avalanche. She listened for the heartbeat. And there in the crushing, lightless pressure of the 1,700-foot trench, she heard it. A rhythmic metallic tapping, *.*.*, *SOS, but it wasn't a machine. It was a human hand tapping against a hull. "I have them," Sarah whispered. She closed her eyes, her mind mapping the final descent. But then her breath caught. Beneath the tapping, beneath the roar of the hull, she heard something else, something massive. Something that made the *** sound like a toy. It was a low-frequency hum, so deep it was more of a feeling than a sound. It was the sound of a mountain moving. A Russian Aquila-class submarine, the Shark of the North, was rising from the silt directly beneath them, its massive hull blocking their path like a rising continent, and it wasn't alone. "Captain," Sarah said, her voice a ghost of itself. "We have company, lots of company." On the sonar screen, which flickered back to life for one final, cruel moment, 3 more signatures appeared. They were surrounded. The Vigilance * was at 1,700 feet, its hull failing, its weapons empty, and the entire Russian Northern Fleet was waiting for them in the dark. Sarah Sullivan looked at the paper in her pocket, the letter from her father, and finally she let herself feel the fear, not for herself, for the men around her. She looked at Huck, she looked at Vance, and then she reached for the pinger. "Everyone," Sarah said, her voice echoing through the ship. "Listen to me very carefully. We have one chance to get out of here, and it's going to involve a lot of noise." The Aquila''s active sonar hit them then, a pulse so powerful it made the light bulbs in the ceiling shatter. The war for the deep wasn't starting anymore. It was over, and the Vigilance * was the only thing left to tell the story. Sarah Sullivan took a deep breath, her head tilted, her ears bleeding, and her mind already mapping the frequency of the Aquila''s reactor. She didn't need a weapon. She was the weapon. "Fire the pinger," she said. "Maximum power, right into their teeth." The active sonar pulse from the Aquila didn't just hit the Vigilance, it violated it. The sound was a physical hand, a blunt force trauma that rippled through the high-tensile steel and slammed into the bones of every man on board. It was the sound of a predator screaming in the face of its prey, a 300-decibel declaration of ownership. Light bulbs in the overhead tracks shattered, showering the bridge in glass that looked like diamonds in the red emergency light. Sarah Sullivan felt the pulse in the marrow of her broken shoulder, a jagged spike of agony that she pushed into a small, dark box in the back of her mind. She didn't have room for pain. She only had room for the noise. She didn't wait for Vance to give the order. She knew the rhythm of the Aquila''s processors, the way the Russian computers stacked their pings to create a 3-dimensional map. They were being painted, and in 10 seconds the Aquila would have a firing solution that didn't require a wake homer. They would use a wire-guided heavy torpedo, and at 1,700 feet, there was nowhere to run. The Vigilance was already flirting with its own destruction. The hull was groaning with a rhythmic, metallic sobbing that Sarah could feel through the soles of her boots. "Chief, override the safety lock on the active array," Sarah said, her voice cutting through the ringing in the crew's ears like a scalpel. She didn't look at Miller. She looked at the acoustic waterfall on her screen, which was currently a solid wall of white light. Huck, I need you to slew the pinger to 350. Maximum gain. I want a focused beam, not a sweep. Ma'am, if we fire the pinger at maximum power this deep, the backscatter could blow out our own transducers. Miller warned, his hand hovering over the emergency cutoff. He was a man who loved his machines, and Sarah was asking him to redline the heart of the boat. The transducers are replaceable, Chief. The hull isn't, Sarah said. She turned to Vance, whose face was a mask of grim realization. He saw the same thing she did, the 4 Russian signatures closing the net. Captain, they're using a standard search and destroy perimeter. They think we're going to try to break for the surface or hide in the trench floor. They don't expect us to charge. Charge? Vance whispered, the word sounding insane at 1,700 feet. The Acula is sitting right on top of a volcanic vent, Sarah said, her finger tracing a line on the thermal map. The heat is creating a massive vertical plume of water with a different salinity and density. It's an acoustic lens. If we hit that plume with a focused high-frequency burst, it'll bounce back and blind their entire bow array. They'll be deaf for 90 seconds. That's our window to get the DSRV. Vance looked at the depth gauge, 1,740 feet. The Vigilance was deeper than any American submarine was ever meant to go. The pop-pop-pop of the oil-canning hull had become a steady, terrifying drumbeat. Do it, Vance said. Sarah didn't hesitate. Her fingers moved over the console with a dark, practiced competence. She wasn't just pushing buttons, she was composing a symphony of chaos. She felt the vibration of the pinger building in the ship's nose, a high-pitched whine that set her teeth on edge. 3, 2, 1, now. The Vigilance bucked as the active array unleashed a concentrated blast of sound. It wasn't a ping, it was a roar. On the sonar screen, the white wall of the Acula's pulse vanished, replaced by a chaotic kaleidoscope of interference. The lens of the volcanic vent had worked perfectly, shattering the Russian sonar into a million useless echoes. Hard rise, Sarah commanded. Ahead flank, helm, intercept the SOS coordinates. We have 80 seconds before they recalibrate. The Vigilance surged forward, its reactor screaming as it poured every ounce of thermal energy into the screw. The boat tilted upward, the angle so steep that the crew had to grab onto bulkheads to keep from sliding. Sarah stayed at her station, her left hand gripping the edge of the console, her right hand, the one attached to the broken shoulder, hanging uselessly at her side. She didn't feel the cold sweat running down her face. She only felt the ticking of the clock in her head. They hit the thermal plume at 1,700 feet. The water temperature outside jumped 30 degrees in a second, causing the hull to expand with a sound like a freight train crashing into a wall. The ship shook violently, the steering vanes vibrating so hard that the helmsman's hands were a blur. I have the target, Huck yelled, his eyes glued to the short-range proximity sensors. It's a DSRV-2. It's wedged into a basalt shelf at 1,780 feet. Ma'am, it's crushed. The pressure hull is failing. Is there life? Sarah asked, her voice a low, focused hum. Huck paused, his headset pressed to his ears. Tapping, it's slow, 1 person, maybe 2, there in the aft chamber, it's the only part still holding air. We can't dock, Miller said, his voice cracking. The angle is too steep. We'll scrape the sail off the Vigilance if we try to get close enough for transfer. We aren't docking, Sarah said. She looked at the damaged control board. The forward escape trunk was still operational, though the seals were leaking. We're going to use the remote recovery winch. Chief, get a team to the trunk. I want the magnetic grapple ready. We're going to snag them like a fish on a line. Sarah, that's a suicide mission for the winch crew, Vance said. The pressure in the trunk. If the seal goes, they'll be vaporized. I'll go, Sarah said. The bridge went silent. The institutional failure that had followed Sarah Sullivan her entire career. The belief that she was a specialist, an analyst, a woman to be kept in a quiet room with a headset, evaporated in that silence. She wasn't asking for permission, she was stating a fact. You have the con, Captain, Sarah said. She stepped away from the console, her gait steady despite the ship's violent motion. Sarah, Vance called out as she reached the hatch. She stopped but didn't turn around. Her back was a straight line of controlled discipline. Don't die down there, Vance said. The mission isn't over, Robert, she replied. She moved through the narrow passageways of the Vigilance, her boots echoing on the metal gratings. The ship was a symphony of distress. Steam was hissing from a broken valve in level 2. The smell of hydraulic fluid was thick in the air, a sweet, cloying scent that tasted like copper. She ignored the men who watched her pass, men with wide, terrified eyes who looked at her as if she were a ghost. She reached the forward escape trunk. Two sailors, kids barely out of school, were standing there with the magnetic grapple. They were trembling, their hands fumbling with the heavy steel cable. "Move," Sarah said. She pushed them aside and took the controls of the winch. Her shoulders screamed as she reached for the overhead lever, a white-hot flash of pain that turned her vision into a blur of red. She gritted her teeth, her breath coming in short, ragged gasps. She didn't let go. She couldn't. "Open the outer hatch," Sarah commanded. "Ma'am, the pressure?" "Open it." The motor groaned as it fought the weight of 1,700 feet of ocean. The hatch cracked open, and the sound of the water was a nightmare, a high-pitched, screaming hiss as the Atlantic tried to force its way into the boat. The trunk flooded instantly, the freezing water hitting Sarah's waist, then her chest. The cold was a physical shock, 1,000 needles stabbing into her skin, but she didn't flinch. She leaned into the winch, her eyes fixed on the small, murky video feed from the external camera. There it was, the DSRV, a small white cylinder, battered and broken, clinging to the edge of a dark basalt cliff. It looked like a toy lost in the basement of the world. Sarah manipulated the joystick with her good hand. The magnetic grapple swung out into the dark, a heavy iron fist at the end of a steel umbilical. The current from the volcanic vent was pushing the Vigilance away, the ship groaning as the engines fought to maintain position. "Steady," Sarah whispered to the ship. "Steady, girl." The grapple missed the first time, slamming into the basalt with a spark that lit up the silt. Sarah didn't curse, she didn't panic. She reset the line, her mind calculating the drift of the water, the oscillation of the cable, the rhythmic pulse of the Vigilance's screw. She felt the moment before it happened, a shift in the acoustic pressure, a change in the noticing. She swung the grapple again, asterisk clack, asterisk the sound of the magnet hitting the DSRV's hull echoed through the trunk. "Got you," Sarah whispered. She began to reel it in, the winch motor screaming as it hauled the dead weight of the rescue sub through the pressurized water. Every inch was a battle. The steel cable hummed with a tension that threatened to snap it, a sound like a violin string being stretched to its breaking point. Suddenly, the ship bucked. A massive explosion rocked the water outside. The Aquila had regained its senses and fired a torpedo. The shockwave hit the Vigilance, throwing Sarah against the wall of the trunk. Her head hit the steel, and for a second the world went black. She woke up to the taste of salt and blood. The water in the trunk was at her chin now. The two sailors were gone, washed back into the main passageway when the inner hatch seal failed. Sarah was alone in the dark, cold water, her shoulder a ruin, her head spinning. But her hand was still on the winch lever. She looked at the screen. The DSRV was 10 feet away, but the Vigilance was sliding. The torpedo hit had damaged the lateral thrusters, and the ship was being sucked into the volcanic plume. "Sarah, get out of there." Vance's voice crackled over the emergency intercom. "We've lost the thrusters, we're falling into the trench, we have to blow the tanks." "Not yet." Sarah screamed, her voice raw. "I have them, give me 10 seconds. "We don't have 10 seconds. The Aquila is turning for a second pass." Sarah ignored him. She put her entire weight onto the winch lever, her boots slipping on the flooded floor. The DSRV hit the outer docking collar with a dull asterisk thud asterisk. "Seal!" Sarah shouted. She slammed the button to close the outer hatch. The motor sputtered, fouled by the silt, then bit. The heavy steel door slid shut, cutting off the scream of the ocean. Sarah hit the drain pump, and the water began to recede, swirling around her legs like a dying beast. She didn't wait for the trunk to empty. She hammered on the inner hatch, her fists bloody. "Open up! Get them out!" Miller and a team of corpsmen were there when the hatch swung open. They dragged the two survivors from the DSRV, a man and a woman, both wearing the dark blue coveralls of the Office of Naval Intelligence. They were unconscious, their skin a translucent blue from the cold, but they were breathing. And clutched in the man's hand was a hard-shelled data drive wrapped in waterproof plastic. Sarah didn't stay to see them saved. She pushed past Miller, her eyes fixed on the forward bulkhead. She could hear it. The Aquila wasn't firing again. It was moving. It was coming in for a ram. She ran back to the bridge, her wet boots squeaking on the deck. She burst through the hatch, a vision of wreckage, soaked to the bone, bleeding from the head, her arm hanging at a grotesque angle. "Captain," she gasped, "the Aquila. They aren't using torpedoes. They're going to crush us against the canyon wall." Vance looked at the sonar. Sarah was right. The massive Russian sub was accelerating, its 7,000-ton bulk turned into a kinetic weapon. They were too deep to maneuver, too damaged to outrun it. "We can't stop them," Miller said, his voice hollow. "We're a dead boat." "No," Sarah said. She walked to the center of the bridge, the dark competence returning to her eyes, brighter and sharper than ever before. "We aren't a dead boat, we're a loud one." She looked at Huck. "Huck, the reactor, I need you to bypass the coolant dampeners. I want the S9G to cavitate. I want it to scream." "Ma'am, that'll melt the core," Huck said, his eyes wide with horror. "It won't melt if we only do it for 5 seconds," Sarah said. She turned to Miller. "Chief, I need the emergency ballast blow, but not the air. I want you to vent the main steam line into the ballast tanks." Miller's jaw dropped. "That'll turn the tanks into a bomb, ma'am, the pressure differential. It'll create a massive, instantaneous bubble of superheated steam," Sarah said, her voice rising with a frantic, brilliant energy. "An acoustic explosion. It'll look like a hull breach to the Acula's sensors. They'll think we've imploded. They'll veer off to avoid the debris field." Vance looked at her. He saw the logic, the desperate, terrifying brilliance of it. It was a bluff, a gamble with the lives of 130 men, played out in the dark at 1,800 feet. "Do it," Vance said. The next 60 seconds were a blur of high-stakes engineering and raw nerves. Huck's hands flew across the reactor console, the hum of the engine rising to a terrifying, metallic shriek as the coolant pumps were bypassed. The Vigilance began to vibrate, a deep, bone-shaking shudder that felt like the ship was trying to tear itself apart. "Acula is at 500 yards. Huck yelled. 400, they're committed." "Now, Chief," Sarah shouted. Miller slammed the manual bypass. The sound was beyond anything Sarah had ever heard. It wasn't a bang, it was a cosmic rip. The high-pressure steam from the reactor hit the freezing water in the ballast tanks, creating an instantaneous phase-change explosion. A massive cloud of bubbles and superheated mist erupted from the Vigilance, expanding into the dark water like a white ghost. On the Acula's sonar, the Vigilance simply vanished into a wall of white noise. To the Russian captain, it looked like the American sub had finally succumbed to the pressure, its hull shattering into a million pieces. The Acula veered hard to port, its massive propellers churning the water as it tried to avoid the debris of the imploding ship. It passed less than 50 feet from the Vigilance's sail, a dark, silent mountain of steel that cast a shadow over the bridge. The shockwave from the steam explosion threw the Vigilance downward. The ship tumbled into the dark, falling like a stone toward the floor of the trench. "Depth! Give me depth!" Vance roared. 1,800, Miller shouted. 1,850, we're falling, we don't have buoyancy. "Get the reactor back online," Sarah yelled, her voice a whip. "Huck, reset the dampeners, we need the screw." The bridge was a chaos of screaming alarms and red lights. Sarah grabbed the helm, her good hand locking onto the yoke. She could feel the water, the heavy, cold weight of it pressing against the ship's nose. She didn't look at the gauges. She listened, she heard the rhythm of the trench. The way the water moved around the basalt spires, she felt the lift of a geothermal current rising from the volcanic vent. "There," she whispered. She pulled the yoke back hard. The Vigilance's nose came up, the ship catching the rising current like a glider. The screw bit into the water, the reactor surging back to life with a defiant roar. They were no longer falling, they were climbing. 1,900 feet, Miller whispered, his voice trembling. "The hull!" "Ma'am, the hull is at the limit. We're holding on by a thread." "Keep us in the plume," Sarah said. "The steam will hide our signature until we clear the ridge." They rose through the dark, a battered, bleeding ghost of a ship. They passed 1,700 feet, then 1,600. The pop-pop-pop of the hull slowed, the steel relaxing as the crushing weight of the ocean began to lift. An hour later, they were at 500 feet. The water was a dark, peaceful blue. The Russian fleet was far behind them, searching the floor of the trench for a wreck that didn't exist. The bridge was quiet now. The alarms had been silenced. The only sound was the steady, comforting hum of the reactor and the quiet sobbing of a young sailor in the corner. Sarah Sullivan sat on the floor, leaning against the sonar console. Her headset was around her neck, the wires trailing in a puddle of salt water. Her ears were still bleeding, the blood drying in dark streaks down her neck. Her shoulder was a mass of purple and black, the bone visibly shifted beneath her skin. She looked up as Vance walked over to her. He looked older, his face lined with the weight of the last 4 hours. He knelt down beside her, his movements slow and stiff. "The ONI agents are awake," he said softly. "The data they have, it's everything you thought it was, Sarah. The listening post, the geothermal tapping, it's all there." Sarah nodded, her eyes closed. "And the cost?" Vance looked around the bridge. At the shattered glass, the burnt-out consoles, the men who would never be the same. We lost 4 men in the engine room when the steam line blew. 6 more are in the infirmary with severe pressure burns. The Vigilance. She's never going to dive again. Her hull is warped beyond repair. But they are alive, Sarah said. The ones who were left. Because of you, Vance said. He reached out and touched her hand, the one that had held the winch, the one that had steered them through the dark. I spent 20 years following the book, Sarah, and the book told me you were a liability. It told me you were too sensitive, too focused on the things that didn't matter. He looked at her, his eyes wet with a hard-earned respect. I was wrong. The book was wrong. You didn't just hear the ocean, Sarah. You heard the truth. Sarah didn't answer. She didn't have the strength for words. She let her head fall back against the cold steel of the console. She felt the ship moving through the water, the rhythmic asterisk, thrum, thrum, thrum asterisk of the screw. She felt the noticing start to fade, the world narrowing back down to the room, the smell of burnt electrical tape, and the taste of her own blood. She was no longer the weapon. She was just a woman broken and tired in a world that would never know her name. Sarah, Vance asked, his voice concerned. I'm here, Robert, she whispered. The Admiral is already on the VLF. They want a full report. They're calling it an unfortunate navigational error in public, but in private, they know. Sarah let out a small, bitter laugh. A navigational error, is that what we're calling it? It's the only way they can keep the data classified, Vance said. The Navy doesn't like miracles, Sarah. They like procedures, and what you did tonight. There's no procedure for that. He stood up and held out his hand to her. Come on, let's get you to the infirmary. Sarah looked at his hand. She looked at the bridge, at Huck and Miller, who were watching her with a quiet, fierce loyalty. She didn't take Vance's hand. She stood up on her own, her legs shaking, her breath catching in her throat as her shoulders shifted. She walked toward the hatch, her head held high, her eyes fixed on the forward bulkhead. She reached the infirmary an hour later. The smell of antiseptic and old blood was overwhelming, a sharp, clean scent that made her eyes water. The corpsmen were working in a frantic, controlled silence, their hands moving over the burned and broken bodies of the crew. Sarah sat on a rolling stool in the corner, waiting her turn. She didn't ask for pain meds. She didn't ask for a bed. She just sat there, her mind drifting through the echoes of the deep. A hand touched her shoulder. It was Miller. He was holding a small silver object, a piece of the DSRV's hull, a twisted shard of titanium that had been caught in the magnetic grapple. I thought you might want this, ma'am, Miller said, his voice rough. Sarah took the shard. It was cold and heavy, the surface etched with the deep, jagged scars of the basalt cliff. It was a piece of the bottom of the world. Thank you, Chief, she said. We're crossing into American waters in 6 hours, Miller said. There's a fleet of tugs and a hospital ship waiting for us off the coast of Maine. They're saying there's going to be a board of inquiry, a formal investigation into the navigational error. Sarah looked at the shard in her hand. Let them investigate. They can take my rank, they can take my career, but they can't take what I heard. Miller nodded, his face solemn. No, ma'am. They can't. He turned to leave, but he stopped at the door. One more thing, ma'am, Huck wanted me to tell you. He's not going to sign the navigational error statement. None of us are. We're going to tell them exactly what happened. We're going to tell them about the Acula, and we're going to tell them about you. Sarah looked up, her heart tightening in her chest. Chief, don't. You'll lose everything. They'll bury you in a desk job in Nebraska. Miller smiled, a slow, tired grin. I've spent 30 years in the deep, ma'am. I think I'd like to see some corn for a change. He walked away, his boots heavy on the deck. Sarah sat alone in the corner of the infirmary. She looked at the shard of titanium, her fingers tracing the jagged edges. She thought about the man and the woman from ONI sleeping in the beds across from her. She thought about the data drive. She thought about the 4 men who didn't make it out of the engine room. The cost was high. It was always high. She leaned her head against the wall and closed her eyes. She didn't listen to the ship anymore. She didn't listen to the ocean. She listened to her own heart. Asterisk thump, thump, thump. Asterisk, it was steady. It was strong. And for the first time in a long time, it was quiet. The Vigilance broke the surface of the Atlantic at dawn. The sun was a pale, cold gold on the horizon, the light reflecting off the gray waves in a way that made the water look like molten lead. The ship was a wreck. The sail was twisted, the hull was stripped of its paint, and the forward torpedo doors were hanging open like a broken jaw. But it was floating. Sarah Sullivan stood on the bridge, her arm in a sling, a white bandage wrapped around her head. She watched as the hospital ship approached, its white hull a stark contrast to the dark, bruised water. Vance was standing beside her, his hand on the railing. He didn't say anything. There was nothing left to say. The institutional failure was waiting for them on that ship. The admirals, the lawyers, the men in suits who would try to turn their survival into a footnote in a diplomatic cable. They would try to explain away the noise. They would try to silence the noticing. But as Sarah looked out over the water, she didn't feel afraid. She didn't feel angry. She felt the weight of the shard in her pocket. She felt the loyalty of the men behind her. And she felt the sun on her face. She had gone into the dark, and she had come back. She had heard the truth, and she had survived the cost. She looked at Vance, and for the first time in the entire mission, she smiled. It was a small, quiet thing, a flicker of light in the shadow of the war. "Ready, Captain?" she asked. Vance looked at her, his eyes reflecting the gold of the sunrise. He straightened his shoulders, the commander of the Vigilance returning to his post. "Ready, Sarah," he said. They stepped off the bridge and into the light. The reckoning was coming. The questions, the accusations, the long, slow grinding of the system. It would take months, perhaps years, to settle the accounts of what had happened in the Lomonosov Ridge. But as the tugboats moved in to pull the Vigilance home, Sarah Sullivan didn't look back. She looked forward toward the shore, toward the world that was still there because she had dared to listen. She was Sarah Sullivan. She was the XO of the Vigilance, and she was the woman who had heard the mountain move. The immediate aftermath was a blur of voices and hands. The transfer to the hospital ship was a choreographed chaos of stretchers and Roman IV bags. Sarah was moved into a private room, a small, sterile box that smelled of bleach and cold air. She lay in the bed, her body finally surrendering to the exhaustion. She felt the heavy, rhythmic pulsing of the ship beneath her, the Vigilance's heartbeat replaced by the hospital ship's larger, slower thrum. A nurse came in and changed her bandages. A doctor checked the set of her shoulder. They spoke to her in soft, professional voices, but they didn't look her in the eye. They knew she was special interest. They knew the men in the black suits were already waiting in the lounge. An hour later, the door opened. It wasn't an admiral. It wasn't a lawyer. It was the man from the DSRV. He was pale, his arm in a cast, but his eyes were sharp and clear. He sat down in the chair beside her bed, his movements careful. "My name is Elias Thorne," he said. His voice was a low rasp, the sound of someone who had breathed too much recycled air. "I'm with the Office of Naval Intelligence, specifically the Deep Seabed Warfare Group." Sarah didn't say anything, she just watched him. "You saved my life, Commander Sullivan," Thorne said. "And more importantly, you saved the data. If the Russians had gotten that drive, or if it had stayed at the bottom of that trench, we would have been blind in the Arctic for the next 50 years. "I didn't do it for the data," Sarah said. "I know," Thorne said. He leaned forward, his face serious. "I heard what happened on the Vigilance. I heard about the pinger, the steam explosion, the Acula." He paused, his eyes searching hers. "They're going to try to bury you, Sarah. They're already talking about a psychological discharge. They're going to say the pressure got to you, that you hallucinated the Acula's movements, and that the Vigilance was damaged by your unorthodox maneuvering." Sarah felt a cold, familiar knot in her stomach. The system was already closing ranks. "But they have a problem," Thorne continued. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, encrypted tablet. He turned it around so she could see the screen. It was a playback of the acoustic data from the DSRV's black box. "We were recording the whole time," Thorne said. "The DSRV's sensors were damaged, but the audio was clear. I have the Acula's signature. I have the sound of your pinger hitting the plume. And I have the recording of the steam explosion." He looked at her, a small, grim smile on his face. "I also have the recording of your voice, Sarah, telling the ship to be steady, telling the men to hold on." He put the tablet back in his pocket. "I'm going to the Board of Inquiry tomorrow, and I'm bringing this with me. They can't bury the data if it's already been entered into the record by ONI." Sarah looked at him, the weight of the last 24 hours finally beginning to lift. "Why are you doing this? You don't even know me." Thorne stood up, his hand gripping the back of the chair for support. "Because I was the one tapping on the hull, Sarah. I was the one who heard you answer." He walked to the door, but he stopped and looked back at her. "The Navy likes procedures, Commander, but the world needs the people who can hear the things the procedures can't." He left the room, the door clicking shut behind him. Sarah lay in the quiet, the sound of the hospital ship's engine a steady, comforting rhythm. She felt the shard of titanium in her hand, the cold metal warming against her skin. She wasn't a liability, she wasn't an alarmist, she was a soldier, and she was ready for the reckoning. The light in the room began to fade as the sun set over the Atlantic. Sarah Sullivan closed her eyes, her breath deep and even. The mission was over. The story was just beginning. And for the first time in her life, Sarah Sullivan wasn't listening for the danger. She was listening to the silence. It was the most beautiful thing she had ever heard. The silence of the recovery ward on the Ussan's Comfort was not the peace Commander Sarah Sullivan had earned. It was a pressurized chamber, a sterile vacuum where the air felt like it was being systematically stripped of its oxygen by men in pressed khakis who hadn't slept in 48 hours. The transition from the violent, rhythmic groaning of the USS Vigilance to the hum of high-efficiency hospital air filtration was too fast, a physical decompression that left Sarah's head spinning. She lay in the center of a narrow bed, her left shoulder immobilized in a rigid cooling brace that pumped ice water through plastic tubes to keep the inflammation of the torn labrum from swallowing her whole arm. The bandages around her head were a stark white crown, but underneath them the world was no longer quiet. The noticing had changed. The preternatural clarity she had used to track the Acula in the dark had been replaced by a persistent, high-pitched whine, a jagged spike of tinnitus that sounded like a tea kettle screaming in a room 3 doors away. She watched the door. She didn't look at the television mounted to the wall, which was currently muted, showing footage of a routine maritime exercise in the North Atlantic. She didn't look at the plastic tray of lukewarm broth that had been sitting on her bedside table for 3 hours. She watched the door because she knew the machinery of the United States Navy was currently grinding her name through its gears. She had saved the boat. She had saved the data. She had saved the men. But in the world of admiral-level optics, saving was often a secondary concern to explaining. The door opened at 0900. It wasn't a nurse. It was a man in his late 50s with the silver hair and the predatory posture of someone who spent his life in the E-ring of the Pentagon. He wore the service khakis of a rear admiral, the 3 stars on his collar catching the fluorescent light. Behind him was a younger officer, a lieutenant commander with a legal pad and a look of practiced neutrality. Sarah recognized the admiral immediately. Raymond Sterling, the man who had written the original assessment that called her acoustically gifted but psychologically, temperamentally unsuited for command. "Commander Sullivan," Sterling said. He didn't ask how she was. He didn't acknowledge the brace or the blood seeping through the corner of her head bandage. He stood at the foot of her bed, his hands clasped behind his back, looking at her as if she were a complicated piece of equipment that had malfunctioned in a way that was going to be very expensive to fix. "Admiral," Sarah said. Her voice was a dry rasp. Every syllable felt like a shard of glass in her throat, a reminder of the hours she had spent breathing in the recycled, pressurized air of a dying submarine. "The Secretary of the Navy has questions," Sterling began, his voice a low, measured baritone. "The State Department has questions. And I, quite frankly, have questions that the telemetry from the Vigilance does not seem to answer. Captain Vance has submitted his preliminary report. It's imaginative." "It's accurate, sir," Sarah said. She didn't move her head. She kept her gaze locked on Sterling's eyes. She knew this game. They were going to try to turn her extraordinary competence into a symptom. They were going to try to make the miracle look like a mistake. "Is it?" Sterling leaned in slightly. "Captain Vance claims you performed a manual override of the reactor coolant system and used a steam venting maneuver to simulate a hull breach. He claims you navigated a 1,000-foot trench using acoustic intuition while the primary sonar was offline. And he claims you did all of this while suffering from a grade 3 concussion and a displaced shoulder." "The logs will confirm the maneuvers, Admiral," Sarah said. "The survivors from the DSRV will confirm the rescue. And the Acula's signature is on the black box, assuming it hasn't been misplaced by naval intelligence yet." The younger officer flinched, his pen stalling over the legal pad. Sterling's face didn't change, but his eyes narrowed. "The Acula signature is ambiguous. Our analysts in Virginia are suggesting it might have been a seismic event, a volcanic gas release from the Lomonosov Ridge. It's a very active area, Commander. Under high pressure, gas bubbles can sound remarkably like a Russian screw." The gaslighting was starting earlier than she had expected. Sarah felt a surge of controlled rage, a cold fire that started in her chest and moved down into her good hand. She didn't let it show. She didn't let her breathing change. She just looked at him, the high-pitched whine in her ears intensifying until it was a physical pressure against her skull. "A gas bubble doesn't ping an American submarine with active sonar, sir," Sarah said. "A gas bubble doesn't fire a wake-homing torpedo. And a gas bubble doesn't turn for a ramming pass when it thinks its target is dead. If your analysts are calling that a seismic event, they need to be fired." or court-martialed for incompetence. "Careful, Commander," Sterling said softly. "The line between a hero and a liability is very thin. Right now, the Navy is looking at a massive bill. The Vigilance is a total loss. Her hull is warped, her reactor core is poisoned, and we have 4 dead sailors. We need a narrative that makes sense to the American public. A navigational error in the face of a natural disaster is something we can manage. An undeclared skirmish with a Russian nuclear sub at 1,800 feet is a problem." "It's the truth," Sarah said. "Truth is a luxury we don't always have at this depth," Sterling replied. He signaled to the legal officer, who stepped forward and placed a single sheet of paper on the rolling table over Sarah's bed. "This is a revised statement of events. It highlights the environmental factors. It mentions your bravery in the face of unprecedented geological instability. It also includes a recommendation for a Distinguished Service Cross and a medical retirement at your current rank with full benefits. It's a clean exit, Sarah. You go home a hero. You never have to worry about your shoulder or your ears again." Sarah looked at the paper. The words environmental anomaly and seismic disturbance jumped out at her. It was a lie wrapped in a medal. It was the institution's way of rewarding her for her silence while ensuring she never had the chance to be right again. "What about the men?" Sarah asked. "What about Huck? What about Miller? What about the families of the 4 sailors in the engine room?" "The families will be taken care of," Sterling said. "They will be told their sons died in the line of duty during a critical national security mission," which is true. "It's half true," Sarah said. "They died fighting. They didn't die in a landslide." She looked at the Admiral, and for a second the mask of the XO of the Vigilance slipped, revealing the raw, bleeding edge of the woman underneath. "You're asking me to tell the world that their lives weren't worth the cost of the truth. You're asking me to make them victims of nature instead of soldiers of the United States. I am asking you to be a professional," Sterling said, his voice hardening. "You were always the best at the job, Sarah. Don't fail the mission now because you want to be right. This isn't about you. It's about the fleet. It's about the treaty. It's about keeping the world from going to war over a piece of data we haven't even finished decrypting yet." "I won't sign it," Sarah said. The silence that followed was heavy, the kind of silence that precedes a depth charge. Sterling didn't move. He didn't sigh. He just looked at her with a profound, clinical disappointment. "Then you will remain here," he said. "Under medical observation, we will conduct a formal board of inquiry. Every decision you made on that boat will be scrutinized. Your medical records, your psych evals, your history of noticing things that weren't there. It will all be part of the record. And I promise you, Commander, when the Navy is done with you, that medal will be the last thing you ever receive." He turned on his heel and walked out, the legal officer scurrying behind him like a shadow. The door clicked shut and the room returned to its sterile, humming vacuum. Sarah sat in the silence, her heart hammering against her ribs. She felt the weight of the institution settling onto her, a pressure far greater than anything the Atlantic had to offer. She looked at her right hand, the one that had steered the Vigilance through the trench. It was shaking, just a little, a microscopic tremor that she couldn't stop. She wasn't alone for long. 20 minutes later, the door opened again. This time it was Captain Robert Vance. He wasn't in khakis. He was in a navy blue hospital gown, a thick bandage wrapped around his torso where the steam burns were still being treated. He looked smaller, his skin a sallow, translucent gray. He was leaning heavily on a walker, his movements slow and agonizing. He didn't say anything at first. He just shuffled over to the chair beside Sarah's bed and lowered himself into it with a groan that sounded like a hull under pressure. He sat there for a long time, his breath coming in shallow hitches. "They came to you too," Sarah said. It wasn't a question. "Sterling," Vance whispered. "He's a bastard, always has been. He offered me a promotion to Rear Admiral lower half, a desk at Comsubfer. All I have to do is agree that I was the one who ordered the steam vent, that I was the one who saw the geological plume, and that you were distressed by the depth." Sarah felt a cold stone settle in her stomach. "Are you going to do it, Robert?" Vance looked at her. His eyes were red-rimmed, the eyes of a man who had seen the bottom of the world and was still trying to find his way back. "I've spent 30 years playing the game, Sarah. I've followed every regulation. I've signed every form. I've been the perfect officer because I thought that's what the boat needed." He looked down at his hands, which were scarred and red from the heat. "But when we were in that trench, when the Acula was coming for us, the book didn't save us. The regulations didn't save us. You did." He reached out and touched the edge of Sarah's bed. "I told them to go to hell, Sarah. I told them that if they wanted a liar for an admiral, they should have picked someone else. I'm resigning my commission as of this morning." Sarah felt a lump form in her throat, a sudden sharp ache that was harder to swallow than the broth. "Robert, you have a family. You have 20 years of retirement pay on the line." "I have my soul, Sarah," Vance said, "and I have the names of 4 men in the engine room who didn't die for a landslide. They died for me, and they died for you." He looked at her with a fierce, sudden clarity. "They're going to try to split us up. They've already moved Miller and Huck to a secure facility in Groton. They're being told that if they talk to the press, they'll be charged with revealing classified intelligence. They're scared, Sarah. They're just kids. They need to know that we haven't given up." "I haven't given up," Sarah said, "but I'm stuck in this bed. I can't even lift my own arm." "You don't need your arm," Vance said. "You need your voice, and you need the data." "Sterling said the data is ambiguous," Sarah said. "He said they're calling the Acula a seismic event." Vance leaned in, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "The data drive from the DSRV isn't with the Navy. Not all of it. Thorne, the ONI guy, he knew what was coming. Before they medevaced him to the hospital in Landstuhl, he gave me a second drive, a mirror. He told me that if anything happened to him, I should give it to the only person who would know what to do with it." Vance reached into the pocket of his hospital gown and pulled out a small, black thumb drive. It was no larger than a key, but it felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. "He said there's something on here that isn't on the official sonar logs," Vance said. "Something the Acula was broadcasting, not a ping, a signal." Sarah took the drive with her good hand. The plastic was cool and smooth. She felt a sudden, familiar electric hum in her mind, the noticing coming back online, sharper and more dangerous than before. "I don't have a computer, Robert," she said. "I'm working on that," Vance said. "But you have to be careful. The room is probably bugged. Sterling doesn't want the truth. He wants a quiet ending. And a woman like you. You're the loudest thing in the Navy right now." He stood up, the walker clicking on the tile floor. "I'm being moved to a rehab facility in Maryland tomorrow. This is the last time I'll be able to talk to you without an escort. Sarah, don't let them tell you what you heard. You're the only one who knows the truth of the deep." He turned and shuffled out of the room, leaving Sarah alone with the black thumb drive and the screaming silence of the hospital. The next 48 hours were an exercise in psychological warfare. The nurses were replaced by Navy corpsmen who didn't speak unless they were giving her medication. The physical therapists were rough, moving her shoulder in ways that made the white-hot pain flare behind her eyes, their faces set in masks of bored indifference. They were trying to break her rhythm. They were trying to make her feel small, broken, and alone. But Sarah Sullivan was not alone. Every time she closed her eyes, she heard the rhythm of the vigilance. She heard the pop-pop-pop of the hull. She heard the laughter of the men in the mess hall, and she heard the heartbeat of the 4 men she had left behind. On the 3rd night, the door opened at 0200. A figure slipped into the room, moving with a silent, practiced grace that didn't belong in a hospital. Sarah was awake instantly, her good hand reaching for the plastic water pitcher on the bedside table. "Easy, Commander," a voice whispered. It was a woman. She was wearing the scrubs of a surgical nurse, but her posture was all wrong, too stiff, too alert. She pulled a small, portable laptop from a hidden pocket in her cart and set it on Sarah's lap. "Who are you?" Sarah asked. "A friend of Elias Thorne," the woman said. "You have 5 minutes. The Wi-Fi is bypassed, but the local sensors will pick up the heat signature if you stay on too long." She didn't wait for a thank you. She stepped to the door and watched the hallway through the small glass pane. Sarah didn't hesitate. She plugged the thumb drive into the laptop. The screen flickered to life, showing a series of encrypted folders. She navigated through them with a dark, surgical precision, her fingers flying over the keyboard. She didn't look at the mission logs or the thermal maps. She went straight to the raw acoustic files, the ones that hadn't been processed by the Navy's cleaner algorithms. She put on the headphones that were attached to the laptop. The sound hit her like a physical blow. It wasn't the Acula. It wasn't the vigilance. It was a low-frequency pulse, a rhythmic, haunting vibration that was buried beneath the white noise of the ocean. It sounded like a song, a complex mathematical melody that repeated every 42 seconds. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. She recognized the pattern. It wasn't a Russian signal. It was a relay, a heartbeat for a network of sensors that stretched across the entire Arctic floor. The Russians hadn't just been geothermal tapping. They were building a global acoustic net, a way to turn the entire ocean into a single, massive ear. And the Acula hadn't been attacking the vigilance to protect a listening post. It had been protecting the brain of the system. She looked at the data packets. The signal was being fed into a series of coordinates that didn't match any known Russian base. She traced the hop, the digital trail jumping from the Lomonosov Ridge to a satellite relay, then back down to a location in the North Atlantic. The coordinates were for a private research facility off the coast of Maine, an American facility. The blood drained from Sarah's face. The noticing didn't just tell her what the sound was, it told her what it asterisk meant asterisk. The Navy wasn't trying to cover up a skirmish with Russia. They were covering up a partnership, a joint venture between high-level American defense contractors and Russian intelligence, a black project that was being hidden from the very people it was supposed to protect. The Acula hadn't been trying to kill them because they were enemies. It had been trying to kill them because they were witnesses to a transaction. 1 minute, the woman in the scrubs whispered. Sarah's mind raced. She knew now why Sterling was so desperate to bury her. It wasn't about optics. It was about treason. If the world knew that American tech was being used to build a Russian surveillance net, the fallout would be catastrophic. It would topple governments. It would end careers. And it would make Sarah Sullivan the most dangerous woman in the world. She pulled the drive, the laptop screen going dark. The woman took the computer and slipped it back into the cart. "What now?" Sarah asked. "Now you survive," the woman said. "They're moving you to a secure facility in Norfolk tomorrow morning. They're going to tell the press you had a stroke, that your injuries were more severe than they first thought." "They're going to disappear me," Sarah said. "They're going to try," the woman said. She looked at Sarah, her eyes dark and cold. "But you aren't the only one who can hear the mountain move, Commander. There are others, people who remember what the uniform is supposed to mean." She turned and pushed the cart out of the room, the wheels squeaking on the floor. Sarah lay back against the pillows, her heart thundering in her ears. The high-pitched whine of the tinnitus was gone, replaced by the low, rhythmic song of the sensor net. She could hear it now even without the headphones. It was everywhere. It was in the walls, in the air, in the very water she drank. She wasn't just a soldier anymore. She was a weapon that had been pointed at the wrong target. The next morning, the moving began. 2 men in dark suits arrived at 0600. They didn't wear uniforms, but they had the flat, dead eyes of contractors, men who were paid to make problems go away. They didn't speak to her. They simply unhooked her IVs, loaded her onto a gurney, and wheeled her out of the ward through a service elevator. They took her to a hangar at the edge of the naval base. A small, unmarked transport plane was waiting, its engines already idling, the smell of jet fuel thick and biting in the cold morning air. As they wheeled her across the tarmac, Sarah saw a figure standing by the perimeter fence. It was Chief Miller. He was wearing civilian clothes, a worn-out Carhartt jacket and a baseball cap, and he was being held back by 2 security guards. He didn't scream. He didn't fight. He just stood there, his eyes fixed on Sarah. He raised a hand, a slow, deliberate salute that was more powerful than any speech. He was telling her he was still there. He was telling her that the crew hadn't forgotten. Sarah tried to raise her hand to return the salute, but the pain in her shoulder was a jagged wall. She couldn't do it. Instead, she looked at him, her eyes burning with a cold, focused promise. Asterisk, I see you, Chief. I see all of you. Asterisk, they loaded her into the plane. The interior was cramped and cold, the metal walls vibrating with the roar of the engines. They strapped her into a seat in the back, the nylon webbing biting into her skin. One of the men in the suit sat across from her, a needle in his hand. "This is for the flight, Commander," he said. His voice was as flat as his eyes. "The pressure at 10,000 feet can be hard on a head injury. We want you to stay comfortable." "I know what you are," Sarah said. The man didn't blink. He reached for her arm, the tip of the needle glinting in the dim light of the cabin. "It doesn't matter what you know," he said. "In an hour, you won't even remember your own name." Sarah looked at the needle. She looked at the man. She felt the noticing flare one last time, a brilliant, white-hot flash of clarity. She didn't fight. She didn't beg. She simply closed her eyes and listened to the rhythm of the plane. She heard the fuel moving through the lines. She heard the oscillation of the turbine blades. She heard the microscopic stress fractures in the wing spar. And she heard the song, the low, rhythmic heartbeat of the sensor net pulsing through the earth beneath her. She wasn't afraid. She was waiting. The needle bit into her skin, and the world began to fade into a dark, cold gray. But as the shadows closed in, Sarah Sullivan didn't see the admiral or the men in the suits. She saw the water. She saw the deep, beautiful dark of the Atlantic, where the truth was buried beneath 1,000 feet of silence. And she knew with a certainty that burned like a star that the silence was about to end. The facility in Norfolk was a tomb. It was an old Cold War era bunker, repurposed into a medical evaluation center for high-clearance personnel who had broken under the strain of the job. There were no windows. There were no clocks. There was only the hum of the fluorescent lights and the steady, rhythmic asterisk thud-thud-thud asterisk of the guards' boots in the hallway. Sarah spent the first 3 days in a drug-induced haze. They were using a combination of benzodiazepines and a low-dose paralytic, enough to keep her mind sluggish and her body weak. She would wake up to find a tray of food she couldn't eat and a doctor she didn't recognize standing over her with a clipboard. "How are we feeling today, Commander?" the doctor would ask. He had a soft, sympathetic voice that made Sarah want to scream. "I want to see my lawyer," she would rasp. "You don't have a lawyer, Sarah," the doctor would say, his hand resting gently on her forehead. "You're a patient. You've suffered a traumatic brain injury. You're confused. You're seeing things that aren't there." "I heard the signal," she would whisper. "The signal was a hallucination," the doctor would reply. "A symptom of the pressure. Don't worry, we're going to help you forget all about it." But they couldn't make her forget. The drugs were powerful, but Sarah's mind was a fortress. She had spent a lifetime training herself to filter out the noise, to find the one true note in a symphony of chaos. She took the drugs they gave her, but she didn't let them in. She pushed them into a small, dark corner of her brain, alongside the pain in her shoulder and the ringing in her ears. On the 4th day, the drugs stopped. She woke up to a clear head and a sharp, biting hunger. The room was empty. The door was locked. She sat up in bed, her body protesting every movement, and looked around. There was a small, black box sitting on the table beside her bed. It wasn't medical equipment, it was a speaker. A voice came through the speaker, distorted and metallic. "Commander Sullivan, I hope you're feeling better." It wasn't Sterling, it wasn't the doctor. It was a voice she didn't know, a woman's voice, cold and precise. "Who is this?" Sarah asked. "A concerned citizen," the voice said. "I've been looking at your file, Sarah. You're an impressive woman, a once-in-a-generation talent according to your instructors at the academy. It's a shame to see that talent wasted on a lost cause." "Is that what the truth is now, a lost cause?" "The truth is whatever we say it is," the voice replied. "But we're willing to make a deal. We know about the drive. We know Captain Vance gave you a mirror of the ONI data." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. She didn't show it. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't lie to me, Sarah. It's beneath you. We know you have it, and we know you've seen the signal. We can't let you walk away with that information, but we don't want to kill you. You're too valuable for that." "Valuable for what?" "For the next phase," the voice said. "The sensor net you found? It's just the beginning. We're building something much larger, something that will make war obsolete. No more surprises, no more hidden movements, a world of total transparency. But to make it work, we need people who can hear the data. We need analysts who don't just look at screens, but who feel the rhythm of the machine." Sarah felt a wave of nausea. They didn't want to silence her. They wanted to recruit her. They wanted to turn her noticing into a tool for the very conspiracy she had uncovered. "I'd rather die," Sarah said. "That can be arranged," the voice said, the tone turning ice cold. "But think about your crew. Think about Miller. Think about Huck. They're being held in a similar facility in South Carolina. They're young. They have their whole lives ahead of them. It would be a tragedy if they were to suffer a medical complication because their XO was stubborn." Sarah felt the walls of the bunker closing in on her. This was the cost. It wasn't just her career or her body. It was the lives of the people who had trusted her, the people who had stayed when the world was falling apart. "What do you want?" Sarah asked. "The drive," the voice said, "and your cooperation. We'll move you to a private facility in Switzerland. You'll have the best medical care in the world. Your shoulder will be repaired. Your ears will be treated. You'll live a life of luxury and purpose. And your crew, they'll be released with honorable discharges and a very generous pension." "And if I say no?" "Then they die," the voice said. "And you'll spend the rest of your life in this room, drugged and forgotten, until your mind finally gives up the ghost. You have 12 hours to decide, Commander. Use them wisely." The speaker went dead. Sarah sat in the silence, her hands trembling. She looked at the door. She looked at the cameras in the corners of the ceiling. She felt the noticing, searching for a way out, for a rhythm she could use, for a flaw in the system. But there was nothing. No sound but the hum of the lights. No vibration but the steady, dead heartbeat of the bunker. She was trapped. She lay back on the bed and closed her eyes. She thought about the vigilance. She thought about the light of the sunrise on the water. She thought about the way the hull felt when the ship was moving at full speed, a living thing beneath her feet. She reached into her mind deeper than she had ever gone before. She bypassed the pain, the drugs, the fear. She went down into the dark, down into the trench of her own soul, And there in the silence she heard it. It wasn't the sensor net. It wasn't the Acula. It was a tapping, slow, rhythmic, persistent. Asterisk clack, clack, clack. Asterisk it was the sound of a magnetic grapple hitting a hull. It was the sound of someone answering the call. Sarah Sullivan opened her eyes. She wasn't trembling anymore. Her gaze was as sharp as a diamond, her mind as clear as the Arctic water. She didn't have a drive, she didn't have a weapon, she didn't have an army, but she had the noticing. And she knew something the woman on the speaker didn't. She knew that every system, no matter how perfect, has a resonance. Every wall has a frequency. Every cage has a key, and she was going to find it. She stood up, her legs shaky, but her resolve absolute. She walked to the center of the room and looked directly into the camera. "I've made my decision," she said. Her voice was a low, steady hum, the sound of a predator waiting in the dark. "Tell Admiral Sterling I'm ready to talk." The door opened 10 minutes later, but it wasn't Sterling. It was the woman in the scrubs from the hospital. She wasn't carrying a laptop this time. She was carrying a silenced 9mm and a set of keys. "We're moving," she said. Her voice was urgent, her eyes darting to the hallway. "The extraction team is in the ventilation shafts. We have 3 minutes before the backup generator kicks in and locks the doors." "Who are you working for?" Sarah asked, her voice steady. "The same people you are, Commander," the woman said. "The ones who don't like it when the Navy sells its soul." She handed Sarah a small, heavy object. It was a 9mm handgun, the metal cold and comforting in her hand. "Can you use that with your left hand?" the woman asked. Sarah looked at the gun. She looked at her broken shoulder, then back at the woman. She shifted her stance, her feet finding the rhythm of the floor, her mind calculating the weight, the balance, the recoil. "I don't need my right hand to hit a target," Sarah said. She stepped out into the hallway, the noticing flooding her senses like a tidal wave. She could hear the guards coming from the north corridor. She could hear the hum of the security cameras. She could hear the heartbeat of the bunker. And she could hear the way out. "Follow me," Sarah said. She didn't run. She moved with a slow, predatory grace, her body a shadow in the dim red light of the emergency lamps. She wasn't the patient anymore. She wasn't the victim. She was the XO of the vigilance, and she was taking her boat back. They reached the end of the corridor just as the first guard rounded the corner. He didn't even have time to raise his rifle. Sarah fired once, the suppressed shot a soft asterisk cough asterisk in the silence. The guard went down, a clean hole in the center of his chest. She didn't flinch. She didn't hesitate. She moved past him, her eyes fixed on the forward bulkhead. "The elevator is dead," the woman in the scrubs said. "We have to use the service stairs." "No," Sarah said. She stopped and pressed her ear to the wall. "The stairs are a kill zone. They have a thermal sensor at the top. As soon as we open the door, they'll vent the shaft with halon gas." "How do you know that?" "I can hear the pipes," Sarah said. "The pressure in the gas lines is already at maximum. They're waiting for us." She turned and pointed to a small, heavy steel door marked asterisk high voltage asterisk. "In there," Sarah said, "that's the transformer room. It's a dead end." "It's not a dead end," Sarah said. "It's the heart of the ship." They burst into the room. The air was thick with the smell of ozone and the heavy, rhythmic thrum of the electrical transformers. Sarah moved to the main control panel, her fingers finding the switches with a dark, practiced competence. "What are you doing?" the woman asked. "I'm changing the frequency," Sarah said. She bypassed the safety locks, her mind visualizing the electrical grid of the bunker. She saw the wires like a map of the ocean floor, the current moving like a tide. She found the primary relay for the security system, the one that controlled the locks, the cameras, and the communications. She didn't just cut the power, she overloaded it. She slammed the final switch, and the transformer room erupted in a shower of sparks. The hum of the bunker rose to a terrifying, metallic shriek, the sound of 5,000 volts of electricity trying to find a way out of the wire. In the hallway, the cameras exploded. The locks on every door in the facility shattered. The communications array on the roof melted into a pile of slag, and in the silence that followed, the bunker went dark. "Now," Sarah said. She stepped out into the hallway, the noticing leading her through the blackness. She didn't need light. She heard the air moving through the vents. She heard the echo of her own footsteps. She heard the path to the surface. They reached the exit 5 minutes later. The heavy steel door was hanging open, the magnetic lock useless in the power surge. Sarah stepped out into the night air. It was cold and damp, the smell of the Atlantic salt thick and biting. She looked up at the sky, the stars a brilliant, uncaring canopy over the dark world. There was a black SUV waiting at the edge of the perimeter fence. A man stood beside it, his face hidden in the shadows. "Commander Sullivan," the man said. It was Elias Thorne. He was leaning on a cane, his arm still in a cast, but his eyes were as sharp as ever. He looked at Sarah, a small, tired smile on his face. "I told you I'd be there to answer the call," he said. Sarah didn't answer. She didn't have the strength for words. She felt the weight of the last 4 days, the last 4 weeks, finally beginning to break her. She felt the pain in her shoulder, the cold in her bones, the exhaustion in her soul. She walked over to the SUV and leaned against the door, her breath coming in short, ragged gasps. "Is it over?" she asked. Thorne looked at the bunker where smoke was beginning to curl out of the ventilation shafts. He looked at the woman in the scrubs, then back at Sarah. "No, Sarah," he said softly. "It's just beginning." He opened the car door and held it for her. "But for tonight, we're still alive and we have the data." Sarah looked at him, then at the gun in her hand. She tucked it into the waistband of her hospital pants and climbed into the car. As the SUV pulled away from the bunker, Sarah looked back at the lights of Norfolk. She thought about Sterling. She thought about the woman on the speaker. She thought about the world that didn't know it was being watched. She felt the shard of titanium in her pocket, the piece of the bottom of the world. She wasn't a liability. She wasn't a hero. She was the one who heard the truth, and the truth was coming for all of them. The SUV sped away into the Virginia night, the lights of the naval base fading into the distance. Inside the car, the silence was thick, punctuated only by the low hum of the engine and the rhythmic clicking of the turn signal. Sarah sat in the back seat, her head leaning against the cold glass of the window. She watched the dark trees blur past, her mind already moving toward the next phase, the next battle, the next silence. But as they crossed the bridge into the city, Sarah felt a sudden, sharp vibration in the seat beneath her. It wasn't the car, it wasn't the road, it was a signal, a low-frequency pulse, rhythmic and haunting, coming from the laptop on Thorne's lap. Thorne looked at the screen, his face turning a ghostly white in the glow of the monitor. "Sarah," he whispered. She sat up, the noticing flaring back to life, sharper and more terrifying than ever before. "What is it?" she asked. Thorne turned the laptop around so she could see the screen. It was a map of the United States. And on the map, hundreds of small red dots were beginning to appear, blinking in a rhythmic mathematical pattern. The dots weren't in the ocean. They weren't on the Lomonosov Ridge. They were in the cities, in the power plants, in the communication hubs, in the very heart of the country. The sensor net wasn't just under the water. It was already here. And as Sarah watched, the dots began to change color, from red to white, from white to blue. A message appeared in the center of the screen, written in a cold, precise font. Asterisk synchronization complete. Asterisk, the noticing hit Sarah like a physical blow, a 300-decibel declaration of ownership. She didn't just see the dots, she heard them. She heard the pulse of a nation being integrated into a machine it didn't even know existed. She looked at Thorne, and for the first time in the entire journey, she felt a cold, deep-seated fear. "It's not just the Navy," she whispered. "No," Thorne said, his voice a low, hollow rasp. "It's everything." The car sped into the heart of the city, a small, dark shadow in a world that was being rewired in the dark. Sarah Sullivan sat in the back seat, her hand gripping the shard of titanium, her eyes fixed on the blinking red dots. The reckoning wasn't coming. It was already here. And the silence was finally over. The SUV didn't stop until the pavement turned to gravel, and the gravel turned to a red clay track that snaked deep into the Blue Ridge Mountains, north of Front Royal. The rain had started again, a thin, freezing mist that clung to the windshield like a second skin. Inside the vehicle, the only light came from the ghost blue glow of Elias Thorne's laptop, casting long, skeletal shadows across Sarah's face. She watched the map on the screen, the blinking dots pulsing in time with the high-pitched whine that had returned to her ears. It wasn't the tinnitus from the concussion anymore. It was the world. The noticing had expanded, reaching out past the confines of her own skull to touch the invisible architecture of the network Thorne had uncovered. Every node on that map was a frequency, a rhythmic heartbeat of data that felt like a physical weight pressing against her chest. "We have 2 hours," Thorne said, his voice barely a whisper. He didn't look at her. He was focused on the signal strength indicator in the corner of the screen. "Maybe less. Once the synchronization reaches 100%, the encryption rolls. If we haven't bypassed the handshake by then, the drive is just a paperweight, and they'll know exactly where the handshake failed." Sarah shifted in her seat, a sharp, white-hot needle of pain lancing through her left shoulder. The brace was gone, replaced by a makeshift sling the woman in the scrubs, whose name Sarah now knew was Miller, though no relation to her chief, had fashioned from a roll of tactical gauze. Every jolt of the SUV on the rutted track felt like a hammer blow to her collarbone. She didn't let out a sound. She just bit the inside of her cheek until she tasted the metallic tang of blood, using the pain to anchor herself against the overwhelming flood of acoustic data. "The cabin is a dead zone," the woman in the front seat said. She was Echo, a former NSA intercept officer who had gone off the grid 3 years ago. She drove the SUV with a flat, professional detachment, her eyes never leaving the dark tunnel of trees illuminated by the headlights. Natural limestone formations and a localized copper mesh in the walls. "It won't stop a dedicated satellite sweep, but it'll buy us the time to breathe. Sterling's people are still scrubbing the bunker in Norfolk. They don't know Thorne's involvement yet. They think you had outside help, but they are looking for a state actor. They aren't looking for 3 ghosts in a Ford Expedition." "They will be," Sarah said. She looked at the blinking dots on the map. "They're using the cellular infrastructure. Every tower in the mid-Atlantic is acting as a relay for the low-frequency pulse. It's not just surveillance, Elias. It's a carrier wave. If you can control the frequency of the background noise, you can control the rhythm of a city. You can induce anxiety, fatigue, even cardiac arrest if the resonance is high enough. They aren't just watching the ocean. They're tuning the population." Thorne looked at her then, his eyes dark with a mixture of awe and terror. "How can you be sure?" "Because I can hear the heartbeat," Sarah said. She closed her eyes, and for a second she wasn't in a car in Virginia. She was back on the Vigilance, feeling the hull groan under the pressure of the deep. She heard the same mathematical melody she had heard on the drive. But here in the open air, it was layered with the hum of the electrical grid, the vibration of the tires on the clay, the distant roar of a commercial jet 5 miles above them. It was a symphony of control, and she was the only one who could hear the conductor. The SUV came to a halt in front of a small, nondescript cabin tucked into a cleft of the mountain. It looked like 100 other weekend rentals in the Shenandoah, but as Echo cut the engine, the silence that followed was unnatural. It was a heavy, pressurized quiet that made Sarah's ears pop. "Out," Echo said. "Move fast. Thorne, get the uplink ready. Sullivan, I need you on the perimeter. I know you're hurt, but I need your ears. If anything moves within 500 yards that doesn't sound like a deer, I need to know 5 minutes before they get here." Sarah climbed out of the car, her legs feeling like they belonged to someone else. The cold air hit her like a physical blow, the scent of damp pine and wet earth filling her lungs. She took the suppressed 9mm Thorne handed her, checking the weight of the magazine with her good hand. It felt light. Everything felt light, as if the gravity of the world had shifted. She walked 20 yards from the cabin, leaning her back against a thick oak tree. She slid down until she was sitting on the damp ground, the cold soaking into her pants, her bad arm tucked tight against her ribs. She didn't high-definition tactical headsets Echo had provided, not for communication, but to amplify the ambient noise. She closed her eyes and let the world in. At first it was just the forest, the drip, drip, drip of water from the leaves, the scuttle of a field mouse in the undergrowth, the wind moving through the upper branches of the pines, a sound like a distant sea. But beneath that there was the hum. It was fainter here, muffled by the mountains, but it was still there, a rhythmic 42-second pulse that matched the song of the Russian sensors. She focused on the rhythm. She let her mind trace the edges of the sound, looking for the gaps, the microscopic pauses where the data transitioned from one node to the next. She was looking for the seam in the net. Inside the cabin, she could hear the clatter of Thorne's keyboard and the low, urgent murmur of Echo's voice on a satellite phone. They were trying to reach the only man Thorne still trusted, Admiral Marcus Halloway, the Vice Chief of Naval Operations. Halloway was an old-school submariner, a man who believed in the chain of command but believed in the truth more. If they could get the data to him, if they could prove the link between the Russian Acula and the American private contractors, they might have a chance. But Halloway was in D.C., and D.C. was the heart of the net. The first hour passed in a blur of pain and vibration. Sarah's fever was rising. She could feel the heat radiating from her shoulder, a dull, pulsing throb that threatened to overwhelm her focus. She used the rhythm of the sensor net to pace her own breathing. Asterisk in for 3 pulses, out for 3. Asterisk Sarah. Thorne's voice crackled through the headset. "I've got the decryption, but you were right. It's worse than we thought. The project isn't just a joint venture. It's a subscription service. The contractors are selling the acoustic stability of the North Atlantic to whoever can pay the premium. Russia, China, private cartels. They've turned the ocean into a private highway, and they're using the Navy as their security guards. The vigilance wasn't supposed to find the sensor net. You were supposed to be the collateral damage that justified a modernization budget that would have expanded the net across the Pacific. Sarah didn't move. Did you reach Holloway? I'm through to his aid, Thorne said. We're setting up a secure channel, but Sterling knows. He's diverted a tactical recovery team from Andrews Air Force Base. They're tracking the satellite handshake. Echo says we have 20 minutes before they are on top of us. They won't come by road, Sarah said. Her voice was flat, certain. The track is too slow. They'll use the ridge line. 2 MH-6 little birds flying low to mask the acoustic signature. They'll drop a fast team on the north slope and move in on foot. How can you possibly know that? Echo's voice broke in. Because the wind just changed, Sarah said, and the trees on the ridge aren't moving the way the wind tells them to. They're reacting to a rotor wash, 5 miles out, maybe 4. She stood up, the movement sending a fresh wave of nausea through her. She leaned against the tree, her good hand gripping the 9mm. Thorne, send the data. Don't wait for the secure channel. Send it to Holloway, send it to the Times, send it to every JAG officer on the East Coast. Burn it all down. If I do that, Sarah, they'll kill you, Thorne said. They'll kill all of us. There won't be any room for a deal. There was never a deal, Elias, Sarah said. She looked toward the ridgeline where the dark shapes of the mountains met the gray of the sky. There was only the truth and the cost of keeping it. She could hear them now, not with her ears, but with her bones. The rhythmic asterisk thump 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 asterisk of the rotors, a sound so familiar it was like a heartbeat. The little birds were coming in blacked out. No lights, no transponders, navigating by the same acoustic net she was using to track them. Echo, get the SUV ready, Sarah commanded. Her voice had the sharp, serrated edge of a commanding officer on the bridge. Thorne, the second that upload hits 100%, you destroy the laptop. Not just the drive, the whole thing. Use the thermite charge in the emergency kit. What about you? Echo asked. I'm going to give them something else to listen to, Sarah said. She walked away from the cabin, moving toward a small clearing 100 yards to the east. She knew the acoustics of the valley now. She knew how the sound bounced off the limestone, how it pooled in the hollows. If she could get the helicopters to focus on the wrong resonance, she could buy Thorne the 90 seconds he needed. She reached the center of the clearing and knelt down. She took the 9mm and fired 3 shots into the air, the suppressed puffs echoing through the trees. To a human ear, it was nothing. To the high-sensitivity microphones on a tactical helicopter, it was a localized acoustic event that would trigger their target acquisition software. She heard the helicopters bank. The sound of the rotors shifted, the pitch rising as they turned toward the clearing. 40 seconds, Thorne, she whispered into the headset. She felt the air begin to vibrate. The little birds were close now, skimming the treetops. She could see the faint shimmer of their exhaust in the darkness. She didn't move. She didn't look for cover. She stood in the center of the clearing, her bad arm hanging uselessly at her side, her good hand holding the gun she knew wouldn't save her. A spotlight hit her. The white light was blinding, a solid wall of brilliance that stripped away the shadows of the forest. Sarah didn't flinch. She stood her ground, looking up into the heart of the light. She could hear the fast team sliding down the ropes, the heavy asterisk thud asterisk of their boots on the ground. She heard the clicks of their safeties being disengaged, the low, tactical chatter over their radios. Commander Sullivan, a voice boomed over a loudspeaker. Drop the weapon and put your hands behind your head, now. Sarah didn't drop the gun. She didn't raise it either. She just stood there, a small, broken figure in the center of a technological hurricane. Upload complete, Thorne's voice said in her ear. It was calm, final, burning now. In the distance, Sarah heard the muffled asterisk foomp asterisk of the thermite charge. A second later, the cabin door flew open and Echo's SUV roared to life, the tires screaming on the gravel as it tore away toward the back trail. The soldiers in the clearing hesitated. They looked toward the cabin, then back at Sarah. The data is gone, Sarah shouted, her voice ringing out over the roar of the helicopters. It's already at the Pentagon. It's at the State Department. You're late. The spotlight wavered. For a heartbeat, the entire world seemed to hang in a state of suspended animation. The noticing was at a fever pitch now, the world a chaotic jumble of frequencies and vibrations. Sarah felt her knees buckle. The pressure in her head was too much, a white-hot spike that felt like it was trying to push its way out of her eyes. She saw a figure step out of the shadows behind the soldiers. It was a man in a flight suit, his face obscured by a tactical mask. He walked toward her, his movements slow and deliberate. He didn't have a rifle, he had a radio. "Admiral Sterling wants to speak with you, Sarah," the man said. He held the radio out. Sarah took it with her good hand. The plastic was warm, vibrating with the static of the net. "Commander," Sterling's voice came through the speaker. He sounded tired, not angry, not defeated, just tired. "You've made a very big mess. Do you have any idea what you've done?" "I told the truth, Admiral," Sarah said. Her voice was weak, but it didn't shake. "I know that's a concept you haven't had to deal with in a while." "The truth is a variable, Sarah," Sterling said. "You've released enough data to cause a diplomatic crisis, yes. You've probably ended my career, but the net is bigger than me. It's bigger than the Navy. You haven't stopped it. You've just made it public. And the public, they'll trade their privacy for the illusion of safety every single time. They'll see the Russian threat in the sensor net and they'll thank us for building it." "Not everyone," Sarah said. "Not the men on the Vigilance, not the families of the 4 sailors you let die." "History doesn't remember the 4, Sterling said. "It remembers the peace that follows the war. You could have been part of that, Sarah. You could have been the one who managed the silence. Now you're just a woman with a broken arm and a head full of noise." "I can hear you, Raymond," Sarah said softly. "I can hear the way your heart skips a beat when you lie. I can hear the tremor in your hand. You think you've won because you've built a bigger cage, but I know the frequency of the lock." She dropped the radio into the mud. The man in the flight suit looked at her for a long moment. He didn't move to arrest her. He didn't move to shoot her. He just signaled to the soldiers. "Secure her," he said, "but don't hurt her. We have orders to transport her to Bethesda for psychological evaluation." As they moved toward her, Sarah let the darkness finally take her. She didn't fight it. She didn't fear it. She just let the noise of the world fade into a single, pure note of silence. The psychological evaluation at Bethesda lasted 6 months. It wasn't the bunker in Norfolk. There were windows. There were clocks. There were doctors who spoke in soft, non-threatening tones and asked her to describe the sounds she heard in her head. They gave her medication to quiet the background noise, a cocktail of antipsychotics and sedatives that made the world feel like it was wrapped in wool. Sarah took the pills. She didn't argue. She didn't try to explain the noticing anymore. She played the part of the broken officer, the hero who had suffered a catastrophic mental break under the pressure of command. She watched the news, which was full of reports about the Arctic Security Initiative, a new joint nation acoustic surveillance net designed to ensure global maritime stability. Admiral Sterling had retired with full honors, citing health reasons. Captain Vance had disappeared from the public eye, though Sarah received a single, unsigned postcard from a small town in Maine, showing a picture of a lighthouse. Echo and Thorn were gone. The FBI had conducted a massive manhunt, but they had found nothing but an empty SUV in a ravine near the West Virginia border. In the eyes of the United States Navy, Commander Sarah Sullivan was a tragedy. She was the best they had produced, a woman of extraordinary talent who had been shattered by the reality of modern warfare. They awarded her the Distinguished Service Cross in a private ceremony in her hospital room. There were no cameras, no speeches, just a 1-star admiral she didn't know pinning the medal to her blue hospital robe. "For your bravery on the Vigilance, Commander," the admiral said. He didn't look her in the eye. "The Navy thanks you for your service." "Thank you, sir," Sarah said. Her voice was flat, the voice of someone who was no longer there. On the day she was discharged, the world was bright and cold. She stood on the steps of the hospital, carrying a small cardboard box that contained the remnants of her life, her medals, her discharge papers, a few photographs, and a small, jagged shard of titanium. A black sedan was waiting for her at the curb. She expected it to be naval intelligence, or perhaps a reporter. But as the window rolled down, she saw a face she hadn't seen in half a year. Chief Miller. He was wearing a suit that didn't quite fit his broad shoulders, his hair cut short, his eyes clear and bright. He didn't say anything. He just opened the door. Sarah got in. They drove through the streets of D.C., moving past the monuments and the government buildings, the city a hive of activity and noise. Sarah looked out the window, and for a second she felt the noticing try to flicker back to life. She felt the vibration of the metro beneath the street, the hum of the cell towers, the rhythmic pulse of the net. But she pushed it down. She didn't want to hear it anymore. "Where are we going, Chief?" she asked. "Groton," Miller said. "There's a hearing, a closed-door session of the Senate Armed Services Committee. Captain Vance is there, Huck is there. They've been waiting for you, ma'am." Sarah looked at him. The data Thorne sent. Did it matter? Miller smiled, a small, grim expression. It mattered to the right people. It didn't stop the net, no, but it stopped the men who were running it for profit. There's a new oversight board, real sailors, not contractors. Holloway is in charge of it. He's calling it Project Vigilance. He reached into his pocket and handed her a small, encrypted thumb drive. Thorne sent this. He said he found the brain of the system, the one you couldn't find in the bunker. It's not in Virginia, it's not in Maine. Where is it? Sarah asked. It's in the water, Miller said. A mobile platform, disguised as a deep-sea mining rig. It's moving through the Atlantic right now, setting the frequencies for the entire eastern seaboard. Sarah took the drive. She felt the weight of it in her hand, the same weight she had felt on the Vigilance. She looked out at the city, at the thousands of people living their lives in the rhythm of a machine they couldn't see. They want you to testify, Sarah, Miller said. They want you to tell them what you heard. They want to know how to stop it if it ever turns on us. Sarah didn't answer. She leaned her head back against the seat and closed her eyes. She thought about the deep. She thought about the silence of the trench, the beauty of the dark, the way the world sounded when there was no one left to listen. She wasn't a commander anymore. She wasn't a hero. She was just a woman who knew a secret. The hearing lasted 3 days. Sarah sat in a small, windowless room in the basement of the Capitol, surrounded by men in suits and uniforms. She told them everything. She told them about the Acula. She told them about the song of the sensors. She told them about the way the vibration felt in her teeth, in her bones, in her soul. She didn't mention the noticing as a gift. She described it as a technical observation, a series of acoustic anomalies that she had recorded and analyzed. She gave them the math. She gave them the frequencies. She gave them the truth, stripped of its miracle and wrapped in the cold, hard language of science. When she was finished, the room was silent. Senator Higgins, the chairman of the committee, looked at her for a long time. He was a man who had seen 4 wars and 10 presidents, a man who thought he knew everything there was to know about the cost of power. "Commander," he said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. "What you're describing, it's a level of control that we aren't prepared for. If what you're saying is true, the very idea of national sovereignty is obsolete. Whoever controls the resonance controls the world." "It's already happening, Senator," Sarah said. "The question isn't whether you can stop it. The question is whether you can hear it before it's too late." "And you?" Higgins asked. "What becomes of you now? You've given us the keys to the kingdom. What do you want in return?" Sarah looked at her hands. They were steady now. The tremor was gone. "I want to go home," she said. She didn't stay for the final report. She didn't stay for the commendations or the inevitable reclassification of her records. She walked out of the Capitol building and into the bright afternoon sun of a Tuesday in October. She took a bus to the airport. She bought a one-way ticket to Billings, Montana. She didn't call anyone. She didn't tell anyone she was coming. She arrived in the middle of the night, the air cold and dry, the sky a vast, glittering expanse of stars that felt close enough to touch. She rented a car and drove 3 hours north into the heart of the mountains to a small cabin she had bought 10 years ago with her first re-enlistment bonus. She pulled into the driveway and cut the engine. The silence hit her first. It wasn't the pressurized silence of the hospital or the bunker. It was real silence. The silence of the earth, the silence of the sky. She stepped out of the car, her boots crunching on the frosted grass. She walked to the edge of the porch and looked out over the valley. She could see the lights of a distant ranch, a few pinpricks of warmth in the dark. She could hear the wind moving through the tall grass, a soft, rhythmic hush that didn't sound like a machine. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the medication the doctors had given her. She looked at the plastic bottle for a moment, then opened it and poured the pills onto the ground. She didn't need the wool anymore. She closed her eyes and let the world back in. She felt the vibration of the earth beneath her feet, the slow, tectonic shift of the mountains. She heard the heartbeat of a coyote 3 miles away. She heard the microscopic click of an ice crystal forming on a blade of grass. And then she heard it. The signal. It was faint here, a ghost of a sound, a rhythmic pulse coming from the satellites above. It was the song of the net, still humming in the background, still trying to find the rhythm of the world. Sarah Sullivan didn't flinch. She didn't feel the rage or the fear. She just listened. She tracked the frequency. She found the seam. She followed the data as it hopped from node to node, crossing the continent, crossing the ocean, diving down into the dark. She followed it all the way to the mobile platform in the Atlantic. She heard the rhythm of the engines. She heard the pop, pop, pop of the hull. She heard the breath of the sailors on board. She reached out with her mind, finding the resonance of the platform's primary relay. She felt the frequency in her own bones, a low, vibrating note that matched the heartbeat of the ship. She didn't need a computer. She didn't need a transmitter. She just needed to breathe. She exhaled a slow, steady breath that carried the kill code she had memorized in the bunker. She didn't say it out loud, she just thought it. She felt the resonance shift, the frequency of her own body aligning with the frequency of the machine. For a heartbeat, Sarah Sullivan was the network, and then she broke it. In the middle of the Atlantic, the mobile platform's communication array shivered and went dark. The sensors across the eastern seaboard flickered and died. The song of the net stuttered, the rhythm falling apart into a chaotic jumble of white noise. It wouldn't last forever, they would find the glitch. They would reboot the system, they would rebuild the cage, but for tonight the world was quiet. Sarah opened her eyes. The high-pitched whine in her ears was gone. The pressure in her chest had lifted. She felt light. She felt real. A shadow moved on the porch. A large, shaggy dog, a golden retriever mix she had left with her neighbor 6 months ago, walked over to her, his tail wagging a slow, rhythmic greeting. He leaned his head against her good leg, his fur warm and soft against her skin. Sarah reached down and scratched him behind the ears. "Hey, bear," she whispered. She looked up at the stars. They were beautiful, silent. She thought about the vigilance. She thought about the men she had saved and the men she had lost. She thought about the institution she had served and the truth she had protected. She felt the shard of titanium in her pocket, the cold weight of the deep. She wasn't a commander anymore. She wasn't a soldier. She was just Sarah. She turned and walked into the cabin, the dog following close at her heels. She didn't turn on the lights. She didn't need them. She knew the rhythm of the house. She knew the sound of the floorboards. She knew the way the air moved through the rooms. She lay down on the small, worn-out sofa, the dog curling up on the rug beside her. She listened to the silence. It was the most beautiful thing she had ever heard. The morning sun began to creep over the ridgeline, casting a long, golden light across the valley. Sarah watched the dust motes dancing in the air, her mind quiet, her heart at peace. She knew they would come for her eventually. The Navy, the contractors, the men who wanted to control the noise. They would find her in this cabin, and they would ask her to do it again. They would tell her the world was in danger. They would tell her she was the only one who could hear the threat. But as she watched the sun rise over the mountains, Sarah Sullivan knew the answer. She wasn't listening for the threat anymore. She was listening for the world. She stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the vast, golden expanse of Montana. She saw the eagle circling in the distance, the elk moving through the trees, the wind ripples in the grass. She felt the noticing fade, the extraordinary gift finally beginning to recede, leaving her with the normal, quiet senses of a human being. She didn't try to hold on to it. She let it go, a final sacrifice to the silence she had earned. She was 34 years old, and for the first time in her life, she was exactly who she was supposed to be. She walked to the kitchen and filled a bowl with water for the dog. She made a pot of coffee, the smell of the beans filling the cabin, a simple, sensory joy that felt like a victory. She sat at the small wooden table and watched the steam rise from her mug. She thought about the 4 men in the engine room. She thought about Miller and Huck. She thought about Vance. She hoped they were finding their own silence. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the Distinguished Service Cross. The gold medal caught the sunlight, a brilliant, mocking reminder of everything she had given up. She looked at it for a moment, then set it on the table next to the shard of titanium. The medal was for what she had done. The titanium was for who she was. She picked up the titanium and held it to her cheek, the cold metal a final connection to the deep. She didn't need the medal. She didn't need the rank. She just needed to be right. The phone on the counter began to ring. It was a landline, an old rotary phone that she had kept for emergencies. She didn't answer it. She knew who it was. She knew it was Holloway or Sterling or Thorne. She knew they were calling to tell her the net was back online. She let it ring. She watched the dog sleeping in the sun. She felt the warmth of the coffee in her hand. She heard the wind in the pines. The phone stopped ringing. The silence returned, deeper and more profound than before. Sarah Sullivan smiled. She picked up the shard of titanium and walked out onto the porch. She stood at the rail and looked out at the mountains, the world stretching out before her in all its messy, beautiful, uncoordinated glory. She took a deep breath, the cold air filling her lungs, her heart beating a slow, steady rhythm that belonged only to her. She reached back and threw the shard of titanium as hard as she could. It glinted in the sun, a silver arc against the blue of the sky before disappearing into the deep, dark green of the forest. She watched the place where it had fallen for a long time. She didn't hear it land. She didn't need to. She turned and went back inside, closing the door behind her, the sound a final, solid thud that echoed through the valley. The world was loud, and the world was dangerous, and the world was full of people who wanted to tune the rhythm to their own design. But in a small cabin in Montana, a woman sat at a wooden table and drank a cup of coffee in the quiet. She was no longer watching the deep. She was home. The coffee was still warm.